The Noble Queen, a Shadow Slave Fanfic. Chapter 1-25. One strike after another, Mongrel blocked every hit as if it were nothing. He seemed to feel no pain and had no problem countering her moves. Each time Queen Bee changed tactics, the demon she was fighting did the same. She had years of training, and yet this newcomer was giving her a run for her life. Queen Bee had never experienced a problem like this before. Most people were easy to read, but the mask of her opponent made discerning his next move exceptionally difficult. Is he even human? The battle raged on. Suddenly, Mongrel left his guard open. Unwilling to let the opportunity pass, Queen Bee surged forward. Her estoc met its mark. Blood flowed. The crowd gasped, feeling the tide of the battle turning. Queen Bee felt it too, but in the reverse of those who were watching the battle unfold. She knew the instant Mongrel had allowed himself to be hit that it had been a trap. Her instincts told her to put as much distance between herself and the monster as she could, but without revealing both her flaw and her aspect, the move was not possible. Instead, she would have to let the demon end her. The petal-laced arena faded from view. Gasping, Noble exited the dreamscape. She hissed, grabbing her abdomen. While the duelist was not physically hurt, she could still feel the phantom pain of Mongrel's fatal slash. She had never been injured like that before. The discomfort quickly subsided. Relaxing, Noble took stock of her situation. It is the end of an era, but it was better to lose than to risk exposing myself. She sighed heavily, opened the pod, and exited into her modest dojo. It was very modest indeed. Few knew it existed at all. It was the place she had kept her identity a secret even from those she held dear. Those who had been to her home knew she had a safe room for while she was in the dream realm, but none of them were so foolish as to take a peek. Most awakened were pretty particular about their sleep space, and Noble was no exception. The dreamscape pod, sleeping pod, and a few tools were the only witnesses to her small practice space. Noble cast a glance at her pod. I should go back for the final ceremony. There were many prizes for her to claim, and she should honor the victor by at least showing there were no hard feelings. Not that she would do anything with the prizes. She had almost not joined, suspecting it was just a way for Valor to try to track her and the other powerful awakened. And as for Mongrel, he had bowed respectfully, but Noble doubted very much if he would care one bit if she returned or not. To her, his drive seemed to be something beyond the battle. She was just a stepping stone in some other quest. Whatever that quest was, he was very driven to complete it. Dismissing her armor, Noble donned the shirt and pants hanging on the wall. Leaving behind the pod, she ran her delicate fingers across her stomach and wandered out of the dojo and into the main part of the house. She was immediately assaulted by the din of a crowd from her living room. What in the world? In the living room, Noble's teenage daughter and 9-year-old twin sons were glued to the projection on the wall. The oldest heard the door shut and pulled her eyes away from the scene. Mom, you're awake. Look. Noble looked at the screen, and her eyes grew wide. The Dreamscape tournament was being shown in its full glory. This is far too violent. The woman glanced past her 3 children on the couch towards her husband, who was in the kitchen making dinner. Dad said we could watch it. That's why he's the cool one. You should have seen Queen Bee, Mom. It was so cool. You just missed it. The teen girl looked back at the screen, ignoring the significant looks between the husband and wife. Noble strolled over to her husband. Yeah, you just missed it. Ford winked and kissed her on the mouth as she glared at him. Noble's anger faded as she kissed him back. Looking down at the meal he was making, her heart clenched. You should have come and gotten me. I did not realize it was as late as it was. The woman's eyes swirled with emotion. And let you miss your big moment. Never, her husband whispered with a small smile. He left the food sizzling on the stove to wrap his arms around the woman he loved. Together they faced the projection. Noble sighed, a frown forming as she leaned her head back on her husband's chest. Some big moment, first place or last, I would be proud of you. But going up against that devil right there, the man looked up from kissing the woman's neck to stare at the projection of the awakened in the mask. That was truly impressive. The two watched in silence as the mongrel challenged Lady Morgan to a battle. Is he crazy? A high-pitched voice from the couch squealed. One of the 9-year-old twins was covering the other's eyes. No, Brock, he is Mongrel, Fort chuckled. In true teenage fashion, Honey rolled her eyes at her father over her shoulder and quickly returned to the incoming battle. Not that it was a long one. I would say poor Mongrel, but he kind of asked for it, Noble said with a wince. He just felt bad about ruining your undefeated record and decided to make it up to you. Noble's husband smirked. I doubt it. There is some mystery there, but I've no time to figure out what it is. I have more important matters to attend to. Noble turned around and picked up where her husband had left off a moment before. He was very quick to respond to her embrace. As the broadcast moved back to the announcers, a series of groans emanated from the couch. Ugh, now comes all the boring stuff. Not even old Uncle Dimmy can make that interesting. What are you two talking about? Ew. The teenager wrinkled her nose. Do you have to do that where I eat? Noble's eyes settled into their more steady blue. Even around her children, she was careful not to let them shift too much. It seemed to unnerve people, and ever since awakening, she had control over what color they turned. So only in the dreamscape or when she was alone with her husband did she relax enough for them to fall into their natural polychromatic state. Do what? This. Noble gave her husband one last peck. If it bothers you so much, I guess you don't want any of your father's famous bibimbap. You wish. The ravenous girl leapt over the couch and rushed to the counter. I've been waiting all day for this. Brock and Blaze followed their older sister's poor example, flying through the air with heroic sounds of valor. I'm hungry. Me too, they chirped on top of one another. Glad to know all the battles were just a prelude to the main event, time with Mom and Dad. Ford laughed at his own joke as he kissed the top of his daughter's head. Few teens craved time with the older generation, including his own beloved girl. Noble chuckled as she glided over to her chair, her feet dangerously close to touching the ground but never quite managing the feat. Then she sat in her chair, or rather hovered over the top, and waited for the others to join her. She could have chanced sitting down all the way. A solid surface under her rear would have been a welcome change. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. But the spell was very particular about what was considered ground, and she didn't want to risk activating her flaw right before a lovely meal with the people she loved. For her flaw was very unforgiving. Noble remembered the first time she had read the runes. Flaw. Head in the clouds. Your body is constantly threatening to float into the great beyond. You will never be grounded again. Touching the earth brings immeasurable pain, yet fully leaving it behind was never an option. She had hoped she was reading it wrong, but the new awakened found out all too quickly how truly vicious the pain could be when she stepped out of her sleeping pod for the first time. She had fought against the floating sensation which threatened to send her flying into the sky. Instead, Noble had sent herself crashing into the ground. The sharp pangs which had racked her soul nearly killed her until she allowed herself to be lifted from the familiar earth. Since then, the brunette had learned to hover within a millimeter or less of the ground and move just like everyone else. Only on rare occasions where she needed to pick something up and touch the floor did Noble allow herself the briefest moment of excruciating pain to retrieve what was lost. It was how she kept her secret. No one except her husband and parents even knew her flaw at all. Noble had debated if she should tell her children but had decided against it. After the loss of Noble's eldest son, Seb, during his first nightmare, Honey and the boys had come into their family as a most precious gift. The burden of letting any of her children know that their mother might randomly float away if she fell asleep or was knocked unconscious in the wrong spot was more stress than any child should have to bear. So Noble faked normalcy for the sake of familial harmony. It was the least she could do. The others quickly joined her at the table with their food. Carrying 2 bowls, Fort placed one down before his wife. Here you go, my love. A meal fit for a queen. He winked. Noble looked down at the colorful dish of rice, vegetables, and beef. She smiled. It truly is. Thank you. I forgot the gochujang sauce. Honey lamented when she had already plopped down in her chair. Don't worry, sweetheart. Allow me. Even as Noble spoke, the 5 small ramekins floated from the low counter through the air and made their way next to each bowl. Thanks, Mom, the kids said happily, digging into their meals. Ford wore a ridiculous grin. I love it when you do that. Not as cool as a combat aspect, but still very handy, Honey agreed between bites. Noble laughed. Ha, imagine me being able to fight. Wouldn't that be something? After spending her required hours in the dream realm, Noble exited her dojo hoping she could spend a few moments with her husband before he awoke. Since the floating awakened couldn't sleep in a bed even if she didn't have to visit the dream realm, stealing early morning moments with Fort was a rare commodity. Their bed was also one of the few places Noble could rest her feet without the horrible effects of her flaw. Alas, it was not meant to be. Noble could already hear bustling in the main part of the house. Entering the kitchen, Noble found porridge simmering on the stove and a smiling man waiting to greet her. "Good morning, my beautiful queen." Noble kissed him. "None of that, someone might hear you." She tilted her head toward the hall. "You'll have to tell them one of these days." Ford wiggled his eyebrows. While he had been a big proponent of not telling their children about his wife's hobby when they were little, he was beginning to change his mind as his daughter was nearing the age of infection. "Tell us what?" A dark-haired girl exited her bedroom and followed her nose into the kitchen. She was already in her school uniform and carrying her book bag. "Nothing important, honey," Noble said quickly. "I was just about to admit that your father is the far superior cook." "That is not news," Honey laughed. Grabbing a bowl of breakfast, she slung her backpack across the back of her chair and sat down to eat. Digging in, she added with her mouth full, "Though you are a much better housekeeper in Movie Buddy. Dad always tries to predict the ending." Fort shrugged. "If you are going to make me watch a romance, don't blame me if I can tell within 2 minutes who is going to end up together after exactly 3 misunderstandings and 1 love triangle." Both ladies rolled their eyes, though they could not exactly refute him. He had an uncanny knack for telling how things would go. As soon as Brock and Blaze bounded into the room, the rest of the family gathered at the table and ate while the twins rambled about their upcoming school day. After a rather large serving, Noble excused herself from the table. "I should probably get ready. I have work in a little over an hour." She kissed the top of the others' heads and headed towards her closet. Even before she made it to the door, her suit coat, purple blouse, and light gray skirt hovered out to meet her. "Thank you," she said as if she had not been the one to make them levitate towards her. Gathered the flying objects, Noble donned the suit and took a look at her communicator. "I am running very early this morning. Love you, Mom," Honey called from the living room, her voice trailing off. "Wait, I will walk with you to the train." Noble rushed toward the front door, her steps not exactly matching her speed. Honey didn't notice. "No, that's all right. No one else's mom walks them to school." She lowered her gaze. "No one at my new school calls me Honey. I would kind of like to keep it that way." Noble understood. The nickname had started off as a private joke between her and her husband. What do all bees need? Honey. But eventually, the name stuck, like honey. Now that their daughter was older, she wanted to have a more mature presence. "When will you be home this evening?" Noble tried to hold on to her daughter just a second longer. The moments that they both had available were becoming less and less common. "After combat training with my tutor." Noble looked over at her husband, who was watching the whole conversation with fascination. He shooed his hand, encouraging her to continue. "What if I trained you instead?" Honey's face blanched. "Don't take this from me. If we are short on money, I will get a job." No, we are fine for money. Enjoy your day, hun, dear." Noble gave the girl a hug. "I love you too." The girl turned on her heels and scurried out the door. Fort gave a weak smile and opened his arms. "It was a good effort. If she knew who you were, she would jump at the chance to be tutored in combat by you." "I bet Mongrel doesn't have this problem," Noble sighed, falling into the man's hug. "You'll always be my queen." Fort rubbed her back as she melted into him. "Not that I really want to train her. It was your idea, you know. After our eldest failed his first nightmare, I'm not sure you should trust me with." "What happened to Seb wasn't your fault." "It wasn't anyone's fault." Fort tightened his grip around Noble as tears threatened his eyes. Hastily blinking, he cleared his throat to change the subject. "Should I order you a PTV transport?" The man pulled out his communicator. "I have already called one for myself and the boys." Noble wiped at her own wet eyes, happy for the shift in conversation. "No need. I will walk to public transit." The lady knew her husband could have a vehicle outside in under 2 minutes. It was one of the perks of his government job. However, maintaining the proper distance from her seat in a PTV was much harder because the vehicle was unpredictable. She could thump her head on the ceiling or worse her rear on the seat without warning. Conversely, the metro's tracks meant that the ride would be smooth and there was no chance of an unexpected bump in the road. It was a far superior method for an awakened such as herself. After kissing her husband, Noble headed out the door to walk down the quiet street. The houses reminded her of her own home growing up before it had been destroyed. Relocating to the NQSC as a young teen had not been easy, and her family had been one of the few to actually escape the horror of the gate that opened in North America. Though this neighborhood was nice, it had certainly changed since they first settled and started their family. Noble didn't know as many of the neighbors anymore. She had barely even seen the man who moved in next door. He was a mystery to her. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Fort had done a government check to make sure he wasn't a criminal. You could never be too careful these days. Reaching the train, Noble found a spot and made herself comfortable. Like everyone else, she pulled out her communicator to pass her time as she traveled. The top story was, of course, the finale of the Dreamscape tournament and the strange turn of events at the awards ceremony. Noble was not willing to look through all the comments, but one caught her attention. "You gave him a run for his money, Queen Bee. I really thought you had him." Leo Stryker had left the note knowing full well that she would not respond. He was just kind that way. Noble never responded to any of her fans, nor did she ever speak while in the Dreamscape. At first, she had not spoken because she was shy, but over time it became part of her persona. No one ever knew what she was thinking, and that had been a distinct advantage. Later on, when she had become more well-known, people had tried to look past her black and gold armor to see the woman behind the mask. When they came up empty, people began to claim she was not a real person, that she was a construct of the Dreamscape itself. The thought was laughable. What did it matter what they thought? It only made fewer people try to test the limits of her fraudulent facade. Other than floating away and leaving her family behind, what Noble dreaded most was someone leaking her identity. Because of this, not even her closest friends knew who she was. Why should she care who knew? The answer was simple. It was one thing to be famous in the Dreamscape. It was quite another to have people mob her in the real world. Noble had never sought fame, only experience. And she had never gained more experience than in her battle with Mongrel. No way, Queen Bee let him win. She didn't want to have to speak in front of Valor, so she lost on purpose. A teen across the train raised his voice against the other young man next to him. Mongrel is 100 times more powerful. She never had a chance. The two boys seemed to have been embroiled in this argument for quite some time, but Noble had been politely ignoring them up until this point. The pair noticed her curious stare and fell silent, embarrassed. She was an awakened, after all, and they were being rowdy on a quiet train. After remaining still for a moment, the first teen met her gaze. "Well, who is right, ma'am?" Noble was caught off guard. Usually, mundane people avoided speaking with her unless spoken to first. But this golden-eyed young man respectfully showed no fear. A small smile came to her face. "Who is right about what?" she asked innocently. "Don't bother her." The second teen was ghostly pale. In a whisper he added, "She probably did not see the tournament." "You are going to get us in trouble for no reason." "Oh, but I did see the tournament," Noble contradicted him politely. Emboldened by her answer, the golden-eyed teen smiled brightly. "And did you see the epic battle between Queen Bee and Mongrel?" Excitement was written all over his face. Noble gave a mischievous grin as her eyes swirled ever so slightly. "Actually, I had a front row seat." Noble said no more for a moment. She wanted to focus as the train took a turn and lifted in the air to tower above the homes and businesses before lowering back down for the next stop. If her body slid contrary to the train, people could become suspicious that she was not actually seated but floating. That would be a problem. As it was, both teens sitting across from her had dropped their communicators into their laps. Had they heard correctly? A front row seat in the Dreamscape. The two had only been able to watch the epic battle on small screens. The awakened before them must have had one of the VIP tickets to the virtual match and had had the full experience. Both boys were tongue-tied for many seconds before they burst with dozens of questions. Noble answered them as best she could, describing the arena and the participants in great detail. No matter how you look at it, it was a harrowing battle. Noble realized she had gained the attention of most of the train car. She did not like the idea of so many eyes on her in this setting. "So, then, what do you think? Did Queen Bee lose on purpose?" The golden-eyed man finally circled back to his original query. Noble hesitated. In truth, she hadn't planned on entering at all, but Honey had talked about how much she admired the tournament, and Noble's vanity had gotten the better of her. Now faced with the question, she wasn't sure of her answer. While she had never used her aspect in combat, she could have. Noble could have levitated Mongrel for a short period of time, but that felt like cheating. And in the end, would that have given her the edge she needed to win? She wasn't sure. "I wouldn't say Queen Bee lost on purpose," Noble answered at last. But I also don't think she gave it all she had. It was a tournament duel, not a life or death battle. If Mongrel had actually wanted to kill her, I don't think the battle would have been so clear-cut. Noble cringed at her own words. Her abdomen suddenly hurt where the blade had sliced through her torso. I told you she didn't lose on purpose, the pale boy gloated. You just heard her say that Queen Bee had more to give. She is an inspiration unlike Mongrel who spouts nonsense. The golden-eyed boy tilted up his chin defiantly. What is your name? Noble couldn't help but ask. The young man flashed a charming smile. I am Ash, ma'am. Well, Ash, I know Queen Bee would be honored by your words. Noble had planned to leave the matter there, but Ash was not through. I hope so. I am probably her biggest fan. I would love to be able to fight like her. The determination in Ash's words touched Noble deeply. She knew she had fans, but meeting one that was so passionate was a new experience. How old are you? The words came out before Noble realized that they might sound rude. I'll be 18 tomorrow, Ash answered without hesitation. He seemed to read Noble's thoughts. No nightmare spell for me, it seems. So, I'll be enlisting in the military next week. I will do my part to defend humanity even if I cannot be an awakened. Noble's heart clenched. He was so young and yet so willing. I wish you well, Ash. With people like you, humanity has a fighting chance. Noble closed her eyes. She could feel them flickering through the various colors until her emotion settled. When she opened them again, the train was descending as it came to the next stop. The pale boy stood. That's enough wholesomeness for me today. I'm out of here. Ash stood with him. Thanks for talking to us, ma'am. He gave a small bow and then a salute. As the two boys exited the train, Ash turned to his friend. I didn't mean to get so heated. The pale young man brushed away the comment. It's ALGDS. Ash rubbed his eyes. It's weird when you text it and far weirder when you say it, like the word is still loading or something. Clicking his tongue, the friend shook his head. You went from apologizing to insulting me in the blink of an eye. Such a backstabber. The boys continued their playful banter on the platform. Have a wonderful day, Noble called after them as the doors closed. They seemed like nice kids, young adults. She thought about the life awaiting Ash as a soldier. Her lips pressed together. Stay safe. Noble looked at her watch. She still had over a half hour before she needed to be at the academy. Things this morning had just gone smoothly. It might be nice to make a little stop along the way. At the next station, Noble exited the train and adjusted the tight bun on the top of her head. This street had survived the recent opening of a gate relatively unscathed. The surrounding areas had not been so lucky. Noble's eyes swirled slightly as she thought about that time. She had not been close enough to help during that crucial moment when part of the NQSC was suddenly ripped apart by the hellish gate. If not for Mongrel's heroism, she could have lost everything. Maybe I did let him win as a thank you. Noble shook off her gloom and forced a smile. People could see her, and as an awakened she needed to put on a brave face. Though because of where she was going, the woman was sure to be genuinely smiling in no time. Those who noticed Noble on the street gave her a respectful nod and made way for her on the path. Something about her presence made people seem to float away from her. Perhaps it was part of her flaw, but it did make her hold even tighter to the few that decided to stick around. One of those people was who she was hoping to see at the end of her morning walk. Soon enough, she spotted a bustling cafe. It had an extra-large crowd pushing into the doors as the smell of fresh bread and coffee wafted out onto the street. Noble chuckled softly as she looked up at the sign over the door which usually held the shop's name, Off the Wheaten Path. But instead of the curly script and friendly coffee and scone, a white sheet was draped over it with a message that was drawing the crowd. On it a small flame was drawn next to 3 simple words, 88 kill streak. She rolled her eyes and laughed softly. Seems like I've come to the right place. Noble pushed her way into the cafe. It was far busier than she had ever seen. A few people gave her dirty looks until they realized she was an awakened. Most decided it was better to let her through and not make her angry. All except one frustrated old woman. I remember when there were no awakened. She shook her fist. I don't care whether you are trying to save the world or not, you have to wait in line like the rest of us. Noble's eyes opened in surprise. Oh no, I am not trying to cut in line. I just wanted to say hello to Noble, over here. A gorgeous redhead exited the kitchen and waved. Seeing the massive line, she gave a brief instruction to the cashier before her more placid demeanor resumed. As the beautiful woman came around the corner of the counter, she was swarmed with people. Fireshing, can I have your autograph? Fireshing, over here, can I get a picture? Fireshing, what was it like to fight Lord Mongrel? The questions all overlapped. Trying not to show her nervousness, the young woman squatted down beside a little girl, pulled out the notepad from her apron, and signed her name. She handed the paper to the child and then took Noble's hand. With an uncomfortable smile to the crowd, the redhead pulled her friend into the kitchen and shut the door. Startled, the new cake decorator looked up from her most recent work of art. Fireshing waved off the worker's obvious concern. It's okay, Jolly. She's a friend. A friend. Noble fanned herself dramatically. Oh, Sarai, how lucky I am to have such a celebrity like you consider me a friend. Sarai blushed heavily as her eyes darted away. I'm the lucky one, she answered with a coy grin. The two women hugged. I didn't expect to see you. I thought we weren't planning to meet up until this afternoon when I got off work. I know, but I was running ahead of schedule, and I thought I would come by and congratulate you on your success in your first tournament. Quite an achievement. It seems I am not the only one who thinks so. Noble could still hear the clamoring outside the door. I suppose you saw the sign outside. It was my manager's idea to increase business. I guess it worked because it's been insanely busy like this ever since the Battle Royale. By refusing to join up with Kim Sato against Mongrel, I have become a folk hero. Though not as much of a hero as Queen Bee or even Lady Morgan of Valor. Sarai was quick not to overplay her own prestige. But Queen Bee is nowhere to be found and I wouldn't go within 2 kilometers of Lady Morgan. She seems terrifying, so you get all my adoration. Fireshing, Fireshing, Noble chanted softly. You are just trying to flatter me. Sarai feigned indignation, but her deep blush betrayed her. If this is your way to get more free pastries, then keep it up. The redhead broke into a big grin and added with full sincerity, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. You know I couldn't have done it without you. Your sparring helped me immensely. I didn't do much, but I will when we train later. Noble winked. I'll let you get back to work. The boss's job is never done. Sarai took a pastry from the cooling rack and tossed it into Noble's waiting hands. This one is on the house. Your daughter popped in on her way to school just a moment ago, and I thought she might buy out the whole store. Noble took a bite of the morsel in her hand and groaned in pleasure. What can I say? We both know quality. She probably wants to bring some home as a surprise tonight. Is she in trouble? Sarai furrowed her brow. Swallowing another bite, Noble shook her head. No, I just offered to help her, and she blew me off. My daughter is a good kid, and she'll want to make it up to me for hurting my feelings. Well, then you raised her right. Honey sweet, just like her mum. Sarai's words of admiration made Noble suddenly self-conscious. She doesn't want to be called honey anymore. Noble looked away. Sarai nodded knowingly as she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Well, then I can call her whatever she prefers. Being a teen is hard work, after all. You are a wonderful friend. The brunette hugged the redhead firmly. I really have to go. See you later. Munching on the doughy goodness in her hand, Noble was very glad that she had made the detour. She went from being early to ever so slightly late, but it was worth it. Another person who makes food better than me. A short while later, Noble changed out her walking shoes for her heels as she hurried toward the large compound where she worked. The Awakened Academy did not really have a dress code. No one wanted to tell a bunch of people with powers how they must be attired, but after years of going with her husband to government events, Noble knew the importance of appearances. Walking up to the academy gates, Noble touched her heart and her head as she passed the candles and other relics left behind for the young woman lying in a pod inside the walls. Changing Star had a very loyal following. Fight well and come back to those who care for you. The grounds of the academy were filled with people. Sleepers as well as staff, both awakened and mundane, were traveling to classes or other engagements. Additional awakened, who were continuing their education or simply in need of the resources that the academy had to offer, were also traversing between buildings. Entering one of the main complexes, Noble passed a man, more like a giant wearing a dark blue uniform. The Awakened's wide shoulders and athletic build would have intimidated most people, but Noble knew him well enough to feel quite comfortable in his presence. His eyes were calm and serious as he inclined his head at the lovely woman. Awakened Noble, Awakened Rock, just the man I was hoping to see. Noble slowed her pace slightly when her colleague neared. Let me guess, Rock gave a small lopsided grin. You want to use one of my training areas this afternoon? Only if it is free. I won't impede the education of the students, of course. Noble rested her hands comfortably on her satchel. Instructor Rock stopped and eyed her carefully for a moment. Her thin frame belied her inner strength. The few times he had seen her spar, he had been impressed with her skill. "You are the most tenacious non-combatant I know," he admitted with a chuckle. "As always, you may use my facility any time you please." Noble gave a small bow. "And as always, I'll be happy to help you in return, Rock." "You always do." Rock's face hardened as he saw two students misbehaving ahead of him. "If you'll excuse me." Noble moved briskly away. As much of a teddy bear as the man could be around her, he was more of a real bear when someone was disrespecting the academy grounds. It was not a scene she wanted to witness. Down a few more corridors, Noble finally arrived at her destination. It was a long walk, that is, if the woman had actually had to walk it. She touched the top of the classroom door for good luck. Noble would need it. Every day teaching sleepers was an adventure. I wonder what today will hold. After dropping her satchel and walking shoes on her desk, Noble slid into her chair and looked at her classroom. Everything was in order. The desks were all in neat rows just as she had left them before the weekend. Thankfully the tournament had run during days she was not already having class, but she could have easily made an excuse, and no one would have asked any questions. To the side of her desk in the corner of the room, a large square area was encased in a clear polymer from floor to ceiling. There was an almost imperceptible door which would let a human into the chamber and out again. The structure was an oddity among the classrooms, but it had become a staple of her class. Indeed, her room would not be the same without it. Looking up at the clock, Noble noted the hour. She pulled out a synthetic page off of her large stack and began to read the information on it. While she worked, students slowly filed into the room and picked their seats. Noble liked to watch how they selected where to sit. Although she tried to pretend she was busy not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, the awakened professor always watched out of the corner of her eye with great fascination. So far there were no familiar faces. That was not unusual. Students could take classes whenever they liked. The sleepers had a limited amount of time before the solstice, so, with the exception of combat courses, they often only stayed in each class for a few weeks before moving to the next. That gave them the widest array of knowledge and often made them feel more prepared. Confidence was a valuable asset in the dream realm as long as it did not turn into cockiness. While Noble wished some stuck around longer so she could impart more of her knowledge, it was also a blessing in disguise. It was harder to get attached to people when they came and went as quickly as nightmare creatures from a gate. Inhaling deeply from her nose, Noble prepared her usual welcome speech. Because none of the sleepers in the room had been with her before, it was important for them to have realistic expectations of what was contained within her course. She stood from her desk, and the gentle murmurings in the room settled into silence. "Good morning, sleepers. I am Professor Noble. In case you are unsure what room you wandered into on this bright Monday, you have found your way into memory assessment and utilization. How many of you have a memory in your possession?" Every hand in the room shot up. Noble gave them a wry smile. "Then it seems like you are in the right place." Her words were met with a ripple of laughter. "Better than usual." They didn't just stare at me blankly. "It's going to be a good day. Who can tell me the 4 main types of memories?" A smug boy with chestnut hair sat back in his chair. He lazily raised his hand. "Everyone knows the categorizations are weapon, armor, tool, charm." "Very good." Noble paused and held out her palm. "Hector of the Siwo Han clan." The sleeper raised one eyebrow at her as if she should know the name. If she did, the professor didn't show it. Her blue eyes stared at him with pleasant indifference. "Hector is correct. Most memories will fall into one of these categories. Some will actually fall into more than one." Already a student was tentatively raising her hand. Noble paused to take her question. The girl had brown hair which cascaded down her shoulders in waves, and gray-green eyes which spoke of deep understanding. But she also looked quite youthful, even for a sleeper. "Please tell me your name and your question." "I'm Catfine, but most people call me Cat." Is it possible for something to not fit into any of those categories?" "Yes, Cat. We are aware of less common categories like garments, for example. On very rare occasions, a memory has defied all the known categories and is labeled something new. I find those memories to be particularly exciting. And sometimes the spell just gives question marks where the type should be or it is blank altogether." Noble studied the girl. The professor's eyes deepened in their blue. "Is there a reason you asked?" Catfine paled and shook her head vigorously. No, I was just curious, she answered quickly, just a little above a whisper. Noble could feel there was something more behind the reluctant girl's question, but she knew better than to press her in front of the 100 other students in the room. Come see me after class with all of your questions, Kat. That goes for the rest of you, too. I will be happy to answer anything that I can. Unfortunately, we won't get into the nitty-gritty in class today. Let us stay with the things you are most likely to encounter in the dream realm. Back to the types. A weapons type memory is usually the most obvious. It is something you can wield to either defend yourself or attack someone else. Armor is something worn on your body which can keep your body from injury. This can sometimes be more subtle. Not all armor memories are tough and metallic. Noble summoned a memory. The rough, sleeveless fabric materialized in a rain of sparks to hang loosely across her body. It was a strange patchwork of colors, resembling something from a tournament of old which the more educated students had read about, called the medieval Dark Ages. This loyal tabard might not look like much, but its fabric is nearly impenetrable by nightmare creatures up through awakened monsters and possibly beyond. Of course, it isn't ideal due to its sleeveless nature, but this beauty is actually able to be worn over or under another set of armor like a second skin. And, in a pinch, it would be better than being unprotected. Having made her point, Noble dismissed the tabard, leaving her feminine suit behind, unwrinkled. As for tools, they are a bit of a catch-all when it comes to memories. They are any memory that can be helpful for survival or battle but are not necessarily used for fighting. If you have a memory but don't know what it is or how it is used, then it is probably a tool. The final option is a charm memory. Some argue that this is a subset of tools while others firmly stand that it is a category all its own. You want to know what I think? Noble looked at the crowd. A few in the class nodded slowly. I think it doesn't matter how we categorize charms as long as we know how to identify and use them. But since the spell delineates them as a different type, I do as well. Noble gave a small shrug and continued, charms can be worn on the body or sometimes paired with another memory to alter or enhance oneself, a memory, or the environment around you. They are the most rare type of memory and also the most valuable. If you receive a charm memory, it would be wise to hold on to it no matter what the temptation to sell it might be. Another student raised his hand. His dark red hair fell in front of his eyes as he swept it to one side. You mentioned people and memories are able to accept and use charms. What about echoes? Yes, they can. It just requires the charm to either have its own fastener or for the echo itself to have a place to house the charm. I like your out-of-the-box thinking. That is the best way to succeed both in the real world and the dream realm. Noble saw the boy sit up a little straighter. It seemed she had inspired at least one person today. Actually, all the students were paying even better attention than usual. A decent group. The dynamics of a class often gave her a hint on how far to go in her lessons. This class seemed ready, even hungry for more. After fielding a few more questions, Noble felt like she could move on from the basics. Now that we have the foundation, the real question is, why should we care? The answer is simple. By identifying your memories, you should have a better idea of how to use them. Without this knowledge, you could get along all right, but having a systematic process for understanding your memories will help you to utilize these tools and trinkets to their full capacity much faster. Speed, in the dream realm, is the difference between surviving unscathed and losing a limb, or worse. So unless you have an ability that allows you to see the intricacies of your memories, this is the best way to save time and live longer. The room seemed to agree with her statements. At least, no one was glaring at her defiantly. Even Hector, whom Noble had thought would find a way to undermine her at every turn, seemed at least to mildly accept what she had to say. Noble smiled. This is going to be fun. The professor cleared her throat. Very well, let's get on with it, shall we? I need a volunteer. I promise it won't hurt, probably. There was a wave of hesitation in the class full of students. A volunteer? What were they volunteering for? Many of them eyed the strange polymer enclosure in the corner of the room. Some of the teachers in the academy had rather unorthodox methods of education. As none of them were familiar with Noble's teaching style, they were reluctant to be the first guinea pig, whatever that was. Finally, a tentative hand raised. It was the young man with fiery hair whose name she had yet to learn. Noble motioned for him to come forward. I didn't catch who you were before, the professor apologized. Hamish, ma'am. The boy dipped his head as he reached the front of the room. His words and actions were respectful, but his cool confidence and slight smile as he passed the attractive raven-haired student at the end of the aisle made Noble believe he was not always so subdued. As long as he doesn't cause trouble in here, Noble hid her grin. It is good to meet you, Hamish. Could you please summon a memory for me? Any memory? Hamish pondered. Noble did not want to assume that he had more than one, but now that she knew, her job became much easier. Good question. Please summon a memory that you know how to use. We will go through the initial evaluation using something you are comfortable with. Hamish took a deep breath and held out his hand. A series of sparks wove itself into a small reflective object in his hand. Not very big, is it? Hector of the Siwo Han clan looked back and winked at the dark-haired beauty. She raised one eyebrow at him in response. A few others chuckled at the comment, clearly wanting the legacy to like them. It isn't this size of the memory that counts. Noble pretended not to understand the innuendo. It is the way it can augment the person's life that matters. A small but ordinary rock can on occasion prove far more useful than even the largest nuclear weapon. Turning back to Hamish, Noble motioned for him to hand her the mirror. Close your eyes and focus on the runes. What can you see? Hamish obeyed. After a moment, he spoke. I see. Name. Fractured fairytale. Rank. Dormant. Type. Tool. Description. No matter how much the princess tried to forget, the memories always returned. He opened his eyes to see the approval of the professor. Very good. You will always be able to see the name, rank, type, and description. Each piece of the puzzle will help you know what to do with the memory. Noble thought about going into the runes and how the translation might not always be exact, but the professor could see by many of the faces that she would lose them if she went too deep. From those clues, you can begin to gather what a memory will do. While a few awakened can actually see the enchantments in a memory, most of us just have to work off of our intuition. How did you figure out what it does? Noble motioned to the small reflective surface in Hamish's hand. I don't know. It just kind of happened. Hamish couldn't quite describe how he had tilted the mirror the first time and activated it. Somehow it had just come naturally. Noble was pleased with his response. She could move on. The fractured fairytale as a utility memory. Tell us, what does it do? It replays my memories, Hamish announced with pride. Then he slouched a little bit, but only from the last half hour or so. I cannot make it go further back than that. Lame memory, Hector muttered loudly under his breath. The professor looked reproachfully at the legacy before giving her volunteer an encouraging smile. Show us what it can do, please. Hamish tilted the mirror and straightened his arm. Suddenly an exact duplicate of Hector and the raven-haired student were projected into the space at the front of the room. Want to have lunch with me later? The projection of Hector asked as he ran his fingers through his hair. The girl pressed her lips together. Some other time. She hurried into the classroom, leaving Hector red-faced in the hall. The memory wavered and faded as Hamish lowered the mirror. You, the legacy screamed as he rose to his feet. What gives you the right to spy on me like that? I wasn't spying. It literally happened in front of the door. Hamish pointed outside. Hector's face flushed. Who do you think you are? You are a nobody. And what are you going to do about it? Send your brother's meter, kilometer, and acre after me. Or perhaps your sister, millimeter. Hamish rolled his eyes. You dare. The legacy surged forward, ready to do excessive damage to Hamish's smug smile. But Hector was stopped short, lifted, and went floating up the stairs of the classroom. Taking their eyes off of their teacher, the rest of the students stared in wonder for a moment as the legacy was placed back in his seat. Hector felt a sudden coolness press against his anger. While it did not snuff out his rage, the sensation did quell it significantly. Noble snapped open her eyes as the last of the psychedelic color faded. Only 1 or 2 sparks remained for those quick enough to peek. That is quite enough from the both of you, Noble said firmly as she released Hector from his levitation. We've enough problems in this world without people going around and creating new ones. Save your fighting for the nightmare creatures. Don't do their job for them. The 2 young men looked visibly chastised. At least for now, it seemed both would behave. Satisfied, Noble continued. Before you get too upset, Hector, I do not think Hamish did it on purpose. She looked pointedly at the red-haired man. Hamish's smug smile subsided. I haven't figured out how to get it to show what I want, yet. It was truly an accident. You will figure it out soon enough. Just give it time and practice. There are nuances that can only be discovered if you are willing to spend the energy to discover them. When Hamish looked slightly exhausted by the idea, Noble smiled gently. That is not to say we don't have a few cheats here and there. With spelltech and some human ingenuity, there are some things we can do to help expedite the process. Many of the students in the room perked up in their seats. Even Hector seemed to come out of his funk a little. Who wouldn't like to have a bit of an edge? In the dream realm, the nightmare creatures did not play fair. Any small advantage could mean the difference between life and death. Gliding over to the desk, Noble flipped up the cover on a small box and pressed a button. A panel in the wall slid away as a slender body appeared. Its eyes flickered and then lit with a radiance that caused those in the room to squint momentarily. The newcomer walked across the floor on two seamless legs and dipped its head before the professor. How may I be of service, Professor Noble? The voice was almost human as were its mannerisms. Its metallic arms were covered with a long white coat resembling a scientist of old. Hamish took a step back from the imposing being. A talking echo. Noble tapped her fingers together. Now, wouldn't that be something? But this is just as impressive. I would like you all to meet B2, my android assistant. B2 raised a metallic hand and waved at the crowd. The students were still wary, but a few of them waved back, unsure what else to do. The android was originally invented by the government, but after not meeting their particular needs, Ford had managed to lend the device to the academy with the understanding that it would remain in his wife's classroom. The name, of course, had been Ford's idea, much to Noble's reluctance. But she was too happy with the gift to complain. After months of tweaks and calling in a favor or two, Professor Noble had infused the flawless android with enough spelltech to be invaluable. Now she would show off what the android could do. B2, Noble addressed her assistant, I would like for you to analyze this mirror. With a whir, the android swept a set of lights across Hamish and his mirror. Don't move, Noble advised the student. After a moment, the lights faded and B2 seemed to turn off. Picking up a datapad from her desk, Noble stared at the results for a moment. What do you see? Hamish resisted the urge to peek over and look at the screen. It seems your memory is of the second tier. That means there is another enchantment which you have yet to use. She paused, looking at the screen for a little longer. Well, it is an active enchantment, so you'll have to wait until you awaken to use it. Any idea what it might be? Hamish's eyes glittered with excitement. I cannot say for sure, but my guess is that it will have to do with altering people's memory of you. I do hope you will come back and tell me if my guess is correct. Just don't use the mirror on me right after to make me forget, alright? Noble was greeted with a few snickers. Such a good group. With her analysis complete, the professor sent the student back to his seat. Who's next? Hands shot up all over the room. This time I want someone who has a memory that they do not know how to use. Noble waited for the inevitable response. In general, people did not like to admit their own incompetence in front of peers, and teams felt the pull to fit in even stronger than most. So one by one the hands all dropped, except two, the enigmatic student named Catfine and the dark-haired girl who had been the point of contention between Hamish and Hector. Just as Noble was about to call on Cat, the stunning brunette dropped her hand and her eyes darted away. Clearly, she had thought the better of whatever it was she was going to present. Instead of paying rapt attention like she had been, the young lady went to drawing on a piece of paper which she pulled from her bag. Curious, that left only one volunteer, making the decision an easy one. Noble waved her forward. Your name? L, the dark-haired student answered. Then, without being asked, she summoned her memory in a shower of sparks. What L held in her hand was a small bright red sphere with delicate green spikes sticking out at irregular intervals. It looked unassuming, but Noble knew that fact did not mean anything when it came to memories. Tell me about it. The student closed her eyes and repeated what she saw. Name, forbidden fruit. Rank, awakened. Type, weapon. Description. The wretch soon learned that tasting that which is not yours can lead to dire consequences. L's face contorted in pain at the final words. Noble wondered if it had to do with the words themselves or if the runes brought up thoughts of her first nightmare. The professor had learned long ago that asking where and how the memories were acquired often led to students breaking down. So Noble simply accepted the information which the students offered freely about their experience in the nightmare realm. Other courses as well as the therapy offered by the school were places which were more suited to working through the trauma. And you don't know what the memory does? Noble needed L to confirm the statement for the other students. I have tried everything I can think of but nothing seems to happen. I am beginning to think its enchantment must require essence to use. Either that or it is defective. Elle sighed helplessly. Every young man in the room fought the urge to come forward to comfort her. Elle either didn't notice or didn't care. Must have an aspect or a flaw that has to do with attraction. B2, Noble said gently. What can you tell me about the memory? B2 lit up the object just like before in a laser line of colored light. Then the android whirred quietly before giving the results. The runes are all as described, but the wielder is mistaken on one point. This Tier 1 memory is working perfectly. Its single enchantment is passive, not active. She should be able to use it. Perhaps it is an issue with her skill. The android flipped its synthetic hair dramatically with the last line. Elle was stunned for a moment. Forgive B2. Androids should really not have personalities, but I couldn't resist. Noble treated B2 more like a companion and a colleague than an instrument, so the professor had added some sass to the bot for her own amusement. Elle processed the information. So I should be able to use this, I'm just not smart enough. No, I think you are just using your head instead of your intuition. Sometimes we bypass our natural inclinations because they don't make sense. Rather than think about what should happen, take a moment and let your hands work on their own. You should feel a gentle pull on your consciousness. Listen to it. Noble's voice rose and fell hypnotically. Whether this was to soothe the student into listening to her subconscious, or just a mannerism the professor had picked up from doing this hundreds of other times, the effect was the same. Elle closed her eyes and held out the memory in her hand as she concentrated. Do you feel anything? Noble asked after an extended pause. I do. It's like there is a string pulling me to do something. The feeling is both coming from within and outside. Elle's words were filled with wonder. Noble nodded. Good, now before you act on that urge. But it was too late. Elle's other hand flew on top of the memory as she began systematically flicking her wrists while gripping the forbidden fruit. Each directional click caused the red sphere to release a cracking sound as if some hidden vertebrae inside were finally being aligned. The spikes of the ball glowed dimly at first but quickly grew in intensity. With a final flourish, the dark-haired student pushed the final piece into place. Done. How did I do? Elle held out the ball. It pulsed with an ominous light. Noble's eyes turned gray. Dismiss the memory. Now. What? Elle did not comprehend the urgency in the professor's voice. Snatching the memory from Elle's palm, Noble rushed to the enclosure in the front of the room and threw the forbidden fruit inside. The door to the chamber was barely shut before the fruit exploded. Deadly spikes went in every direction, rattling against the clear walls before clattering to the ground. Deep red pulp followed only a millisecond behind, and as it dripped down, the sickening display looked highly poisonous. You did it, Noble answered, her face returning to its normal calm exterior. Well done. Feel free to dismiss it before that juice tries to eat through the floor. Elle obliged before hurrying back to her seat, somewhat embarrassed. Most of the students were too busy fawning over her to notice the change. I am glad that was only an awakened memory. I am not sure how much more my chamber could have held. Noble held up her hands when she saw the alarmed faces. I am kidding. That thing can hold almost anything you can throw at it. Hector raised his hand. Professor, since you knew that the memory was a weapon, why didn't you make Elle use the chamber to begin with? I mean, we could have been seriously injured. The students around him exchanged glances. It had seemed like a rather serious mistake. B2 laughed robotically. It appeared that the android had been programmed with some semblance of a sense of humor. In response to the accusation, Noble nodded slowly. I must say I am impressed, Hector. You have made a very astute observation. To answer your question, I intentionally did not put your classmate in the chamber for 2 reasons. Do you care to guess what they are? With the question turned back on himself, Hector straightened his back. It's obvious, of course. The young man hesitated. I just wanted the others to realize why you did what you did. I am not sure anyone else was genius enough to understand. Very well, the professor opened up the question to the rest of the room. Does anyone want to show off their critical thinking skills and tell me why I did what I did? Noble happily called on the brunette with the wavy hair. Kat cleared her throat. Well, we have no guarantee that the memory would not have hurt Elle. It was much easier to throw the fruit into the chamber than it would have been to drag Elle out. Very good, Hamish. The red-headed boy held a mischievous grin. Well, now that we know how close we all came to death or dismemberment, we are likely to be more careful. I know I myself would not have taken safety seriously if not for this little demonstration. There is great value in showing and not just telling. I could have told you until I was blue in the face to be careful with unfamiliar memories, and most of you would have ignored me. Now, when I say my chamber and my assistants are always available, perhaps at least a few of you will take me up on the offer while you are here. And if a hole gets blown into the side of the student dormitory, it is no longer my fault, probably. Student after student brought forward memories to be analyzed. A cloak which kept the user warm from the elements. A charm which allowed the wielder to be hyper-focused. And even a tool which contained an endless amount of powder. When applied to the face, the person took on a completely different, highly appealing visage for as long as the powder remained. That one might be worth selling. There is a very big market for cosmetic memories. That alone could get you enough money for a few years, Noble informed the young man. Of course, Hector had to show off his ascended weapon which had been gifted to him from his clan. Noble gave the memory the due amount of respect without swelling the young man's head too much. All in all, the class flew by. When it was time to dismiss, the professor was pretty confident at least a few would return. Today was a good class, B2 observed. It was, wasn't it? Noble glided to her seat. She set down her datapad and picked up the first sheet in the mountain of pages from the corner of her desk. Each memory which was analyzed had caused a report to be printed from a contraption on her desk. The high volume of scans had caused the pile to be unusually large. The information from the pages could either be discarded, put into the Academy's database, or, on rare occasion, forwarded to the government or another research facility to increase humanity's knowledge. Noble knew this data would take a considerable amount of time to wade through. There's just one problem. The android interrupted the professor's progress. Noble looked up from the paper. Oh, and what's that? B2 pointed to the lone student left behind in the room. Her. In the excitement of classifying so many memories, Noble had forgotten that she had told Catfine to stay behind after class. Or rather, the professor had offered to help when everything was through. The sleeper sat frozen in her seat, unsure of what her next move should be. Her dewy eyes spoke of some inner struggle. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, Noble offered. I am sorry if I made it sound like you had no other option. No, Cat swallowed. You were very kind. I just, falling silent, the girl interlaced her fingers in her hair and held her head. Something was clearly wrong. Noble stood from her desk and made her way up the steps before kneeling beside the student. Does your head hurt? Constantly. Catfine gave a weak smile. But I'm learning to get a handle on it. I don't want to pry, but is it part of your flaw? Noble was all too familiar with how devastating flaws could be. They seemed to be tailor-made for the one who possessed them, almost as if each was woven into the very fabric of the person even before the spell even infected them. Getting used to new limitations alongside new abilities was no small task. It is related to my flaw and aspect both, the student answered vaguely, but I don't need help with that right now. What do you need help with? Noble took up residence at the desk beside the girl. Wiping at her eyes, Catfine took a deep breath and summoned a memory from her soul sea. A myriad of sparks revealed an orb about the size of her fist. But unlike Elle's memory, which had resembled a dragon fruit, this ball was blacker than night and full of ominous energy. Was this what made you ask the question at the beginning of class? Noble noted the girl's small nod. What can you tell me about the memory? Catfine looked down. That's just it. I cannot tell you much at all. Only its name, Portcullis Key. Most of the information is a bunch of question marks. I am not even positive how I earned the memory or from what creature it came. In my nightmare, I was struggling to cross a wasteland to reach my goal when I stepped on something through the sand. It shattered like glass and I got the memory but no mention of a kill. When I went to search for a creature below my foot, I could not find one. Memories are bestowed somewhat randomly, not earned like in some webtoons. As for the creature, or rather a lack of one, that is most curious indeed. The teacher's lips tilted up slightly. She did like a good mystery. I tried using my intuition like you told Elle to do. All it did was give me a deep sense of foreboding and fear. The younger brunette shivered unconsciously. Noble stood in motion for Cat to follow. Come on, let us put your mind at ease and see what B2 can tell us. The android stood unmoving at the front of the room, looking both welcoming and forbidding at the same time. While not a nightmare creature or an echo, Catfine had no doubt that there was considerable physical strength behind the machine. Holding out the smooth, reflective orb, Cat waited anxiously as it was bathed in a set of lasered lights. B2 whirred for a long time, paused, and whirred to life again. Pages piled up on Noble's desk. Rather than reading the copy of the results on her datapad, she picked up the top page and perused its contents. Her expression became tense. B2, are you alright? I am as fit as I always have been. Androids do not get sick. Catfine's shoulders came closer and closer to her ears as she waited for the professor's evaluation. What do you see? She asked when she could take it no longer. Noble passed over the synthetic paper to the girl. Kat's hazel eyes stared blankly at the page. I cannot read this. That's the problem. Neither can I. Some of it is runic in nature, and some of it I cannot read at all. But if B2 is functioning properly, then that means something else is at work here. You may have really discovered something unique. Having no other explanation for the strange readings, the professor gave the girl what little answers she could. This was a first. There was no information on a memory like this before. Perhaps the ominous orb was interfering with the spelltech in some way. Something was amiss. Thank you for trying. I knew that would be the answer, sadly. Kat inhaled deeply through her nose. Her brow furrowed as she looked down at the trinket in her hand. It disappeared in a swarm of firefly lights. Wait, you knew. Noble raised one eyebrow. Most students would have asked at least a dozen more questions, but Catfine seemed resigned to the lack of information. The professor was suddenly even more motivated to help the young woman. Don't give up. Just because the technology has failed us does not mean that we cannot use our brains. I did not fail, B2 muttered in a metallic voice. I gave you exactly what you asked for. Forgive me. Noble felt a little strange apologizing to the android but still felt like it was the right thing to do. You did admirably. Thank you. Turning back to Kat, the professor resumed the original conversation. You said it was called the portcullis key. That can give us a clue. It doesn't look like a key. Catfine had done all she could to try and manipulate it into something that might open a lock. There are many kinds of keys, but a portcullis does not usually need one. Gates like that were opened by chains or ropes attached to an internal winch. Do you know where or even when you were in the dream realm for your nightmare? Along with other scholars, Noble believed that nightmares were recreations of events of the past, so being able to place where the memory was gained might possibly give some insight into its use. Catfine pulled her mouth to one side. I do not know where, but I could possibly figure it out. I would have to do some research. That seems like a good course of action, but I wouldn't invest too much time in that until after the winter solstice. Once you know where this key came from, you may be able to return to that part of the dream realm to search for clues. Finding the origin of the memory could be the key to unlock the key. I don't ever want to return to that place, even if it is just ruins now. Cat paled. I can't. If that is the only way to find out more about this memory, then I don't want it. You take it, please. Noble shook her head. Teachers were not allowed to accept gifts from students. This was to protect the students from misconduct by someone who was in authority. But Catfine had already grabbed her hand and begun to transfer the item to the professor without her consent. Noble felt her hand tingle as the spell whispered in her ear. You have received a memory. Before Noble could return it, Cat had already stepped away. How about this? I will figure out what it is and then return it to you. Until then, please keep this and feel free to use it as you see fit. It was the professor's turn to hurry forward before the other could object. Catfine's eyes widened when she looked at what she had gotten. Armor. I have plenty of suits of armor, but only a couple I like to wear. This one seems like it might suit you. The younger brunette closed her eyes for a moment and when she opened them again, a huge smile spread across her face. Thank you, it is just what I needed. If it is all the same to you, I would prefer if we just traded. I cannot agree to that as long as you are a student. Once I figure out its purpose, I must return it. Noble felt a little bad, but surely once the mystery was revealed, the girl would want her memory back. Take your time, then, Catfine said. You're going to need it. Noble felt there was something off with her words. Wait, do you mean I am going to need time or the memory? We shall see. Cat smiled, happy to be clear of what burdened her. She gathered her things and began to leave. May I ask one question? Your aspect, does it have to do with seeing the future? Perhaps, Catfine answered with a furrowed brow. It's hard to say, but I suppose we will find out soon enough. With that, she gathered her things and left Noble alone in the large classroom. The woman sighed. Well, that wasn't ominous at all. Moving back to her desk chair, Noble glanced at the analysis on the portcullis key one more time. B2, can you make any sense of this? The android raised one eyebrow at the professor. I have given you all I can. Would you like me to divert my computing power from my other directive to this one? No, no, I do not want anything taken away from your other directive. Have you made any progress on that front? The professor stared hopefully at her robotic companion. There is no new information on the gate which opened in the city center. I actually find the lack of information to be an anomaly. B2 paused. Would you like me to dig into the government records? I still have access to some of the databases. Noble bit her lip. She had been trying to obtain the information about the gate for weeks with no progress. Something was not right. She rubbed her head. Don't do anything illegal, but I would appreciate it if you would poke around. Since the android still had permission to use the databases, accessing them wasn't inherently wrong, but checking in too many of the wrong places might have that privilege revoked. It was a delicate balance. Try to spread your inquiries over the next 12 hours or more, the professor added. Doing it all at once will raise a flag or two. Of course. B2 began to back away. With a dip of the head, the android returned to the hidden alcove in the classroom and shut the door. Left alone, Noble closed her eyes and dove into her soul sea. Time to get a closer look at this memory. The professor stood on a tranquil shore. The water shimmered with the same polychromatic sheen as her mysterious eyes. Overhead, her bright soul core was surrounded by many lesser lights, all swirling around the nexus of her very being. The entire sea and all around it were suffused with a warm light. If Earth were bathed in such overwhelming brilliance, it would bake until burnt, but Noble found the light comforting, welcoming even. Squinting slightly, the woman looked for the newest addition to her soul sea, and without having to say a word, it floated down toward her and materialized before her eyes. Although Noble had experienced discomfort when Cat displayed it before, the professor now sensed intense foreboding coming off of the otherwise unassuming ball. She tried to intuitively find a way to make the ball do something. Anything. But it lay still and lifeless. No strings pulled at her consciousness to give her any instruction. Very strange. I'll have to mess with it more later. With barely a thought, runes shimmered in front of Noble's perception. Name. Portcullis key. Rank. Type. Description. Entrance. It was just as Catfine had described, though Noble had one additional word to work with than her student had provided. Maybe it was because the professor had a better knowledge of the runic language, or maybe Cat hadn't found the single word worth mentioning. Entrance. It made some sense. What was a key supposed to do but provide entrance? Noble looked past the spell's translation to what was behind it. Her confusion only deepened. The runes were warped, not the clean shapes she was used to seeing. Some of them mimicked the readout that B2 had given her. Others were unlike anything Noble could adequately describe. It was as if the original runes were overwritten but not fully erased. Like someone had changed the original purpose of the memory. The result was an overlay of symbols that was both messy and confusing. Only the 3 words which the spell had translated had remained untouched. If someone had done this, then they had left those words the same for an important reason. Why would anyone do this? And how? Cat only just got this memory, and she said it came like this. In her research, there were a few isolated instances where a memory was obtained in the dream realm without killing a creature. Some scholars dismissed this anomaly as boasting or confusion on the part of the awakened, but Noble was not so sure. Few things about the spell follow human rules. Why should this be an exception? Perhaps, what if Cat had stepped on the memory, crushed it, and absorbed it as a result? It was a strange thought, but stranger things had happened. If this were the case, then the previous owner might have done something to it to modify it. Can one modify memories in such a way? Each possible answer brought new questions to the professor's mind. Clan Valor had people who could forge memories. Wasn't it very likely that someone among their ranks could alter existing ones? As the mighty clan held the secrets of their trade tightly, it was hard to know for sure. But it was certainly within the realm of possibilities. Enough speculation. If I cannot find the answers here, I'll look in the next logical place. The tenebrous orb in front of her sparkled and dissipated. Above her, another star appeared in the bright sky. Leaving her soul sea, Noble opened her eyes. Back in her classroom, nothing had changed. She didn't really need to shut her eyes while in her soul sea, but for her, it was safer to do that than to let the color of her eyes go haywire while she was distracted. Being constantly paranoid had kept her safe this long, and the professor planned to continue that trend. Collecting the report on the mysterious key and placing it neatly in her bag, Noble headed into the hall in search of her longtime mentor. She left a note on her door with her information for any individual who might need her while she was away. You never know when another L will stumble on a piece of fruit. The corridors were relatively empty. Most students and faculty were either at lunch or heading there. Noble wondered if she would have better luck searching in the cafeteria first, but her gut said the gentleman would still be in his classroom studying feverishly behind his desk. After knowing him for more than 15 years, Noble had developed sort of a sixth sense of where the enthusiastic teacher would be. It seldom failed her. Sure enough, when she drew near, voices could be heard behind the closed door. Rather than knock or barge in, Noble decided to wait and let the conversation conclude naturally. She did not have to wait long. The door opened, and a young man came barreling out of the room. Noble prepared to move aside when the awakened, without even glancing her way, easily avoided her and continued down the hall. Show off, Noble thought, but part of her felt a bizarre sense of kinship with the stranger. Regrettably, she had been so focused on not slamming into him that she hadn't gotten a look at the man's face. Glancing over her shoulder, Noble could see his dark hair and the pale skin of his hands, but nothing else to tell her of his identity as he rushed down the corridor. Professor Noble. The happy cheer came from inside the cozy classroom. The woman smiled genuinely at hearing the grandfatherly teacher call her name. No matter his mood, he always greeted her with warmth. The lively old man ran his fingers through his messy gray hair. Come in, come in. His normally absent-minded eyes were focused on his guest as he ushered her in the door and offered a friendly hug. Pulling away after the embrace, the lady dipped her head to her senior. It's always a pleasure to see you, Teacher Julius. It is always funny to hear you call me Professor, Noble chuckled awkwardly. The idea of someone whom she had revered calling her Professor seemed so out of place when he simply went by, Teacher. The title was well earned by you, and you will never convince me otherwise. What kind of mentor would I be if I didn't desire for you to outshine me? Julius's bushy eyebrows wiggled with merriment. Of course, the titles were all a political game that Noble did not want to play, so she let the matter pass. As long as her beloved mentor and colleague knew how much she appreciated him, that was enough for her. The older gentleman licked his lips. Have you come to accompany me to lunch? If you'll have me, I would be honored. Realistically, Noble's query could wait. It was not a life or death situation, and a meal with her colleague sounded quite pleasant. Old-fashioned as he was, Julius offered the younger lady his arm, which she gladly took. They exited the classroom, and the teacher locked his door. Not that the flimsy blockade would do anything to stop an awakened who wanted to enter, but at least it made things a little more challenging if one tried. Their trip to the faculty cafeteria was a decent walk, and Julius seemed content not to waste a moment of time. Tell me about the kids in Fort. Is your husband still behaving himself? The kids are doing just fine. The boys are as rowdy as ever and giving their school teacher fits by switching places all the time. I think I told you that Honey, my eldest, started at a new school not that long ago. And Fort is doing his job admirably just like the rest of us. It feels like just yesterday you brought Honey home and those boys were barely a twinkle in your husband's eye. Of course, it feels like it was only last week when you came to the academy for the first time as a student. Time really does fly, Julius sighed a little too anciently, causing himself to chuckle at his own reminiscing. Forgive me, I fear I am boring you. Not at all. Noble almost told him that nothing he could say would bore her, but feared he might chalk it up to her good nature and not her genuine interest in his words. For Julius was a second father figure to her. When Noble had come out of her first nightmare, the white-haired teacher had been a relatively fresh face in the faculty of the academy. The two hit it off almost instantly. Julius had a passion for both history and the survival of his students, and Noble had a thirst for knowledge. The teen with the interesting eyes, Noble hadn't fully learned to control them yet, had caught the survivalist teacher's attention. The girl had been unlucky enough to be infected with the nightmare spell just before her 18th birthday. If that were not enough, the loss of her father shortly after entering the academy nearly devastated the sleeper before she could awaken. These circumstances, along with Noble's natural curiosity and academic bent, had made Julius feel an intense motivation to help the youth succeed. His efforts forever cemented a place in the woman's heart. Without his prodding, Noble might have given up in what seemed a hopeless time. Determined to make her teacher proud, Noble awakened in near record time. After visiting her mother to prove she was all right, Noble immediately returned to the academy to thank her mentor. Thus, a friendship was born. Julius had been to all her major life events both in joy and sorrow. He had come to her wedding and also attended the funeral of her eldest son. The teacher had visited the hospital when the twins were born and even brought her kids birthday gifts when they were young. The children occasionally called him grandfather by accident, much to Julius's delight. When Noble eventually took a faculty position at the academy, it was as if things had come full circle. She really couldn't imagine a better life for herself, and a large part of it was due to the man who was now happily telling her about his latest research paper. Admittedly, it is not exactly my work. I am mostly just helping smooth out the rough edges. But I am becoming convinced that parts of the Chained Isles are just as fascinating and unknown to us as the Forgotten Shore was a year ago. Julius's eyes sparkled. Just because he couldn't go there himself did not mean he was unable to travel there vicariously through others' eyes. It sounds like you are keeping busy. I do hope you aren't overdoing it. Noble knew that she and her mentor were alike in many ways. One of those was a tendency to take on more work than was realistic. It was easy to burn out when there were too many projects piling up. Don't you worry about me. I thrive on all of these reports, I assure you. Julius winked so hard his bushy eyebrow nearly met the lashes beneath. At last, they reached the instructor's cafeteria. The place was a safe haven from students who usually needed something, and it was much nicer than almost any other facility at the academy. The wood furniture from a slain titan shone in pristine condition despite its near-constant use. The tall windows allowed in plenty of light, giving the room a comfortable atmosphere. After ordering and enjoying their food, Julius finally pushed his plate away and sighed at his companion. Noble looked up at him quizzically. What's wrong? You didn't come by just to have lunch with me. The old man touched the side of his nose. And although I have immensely enjoyed being able to catch up with you, my dear girl, I do think you better come clean on why you came to visit. Noble felt a little guilty. The professor did not want Julius to think she only ever came around when she needed a favor. Am I really so easy to read? Only to me and probably Fort. Julius leaned back in his seat and patted his stomach comfortably. If this isn't a good time, I can let you get back to your other work. I did not realize you had so much going on when I came to ask for help. Noble held up her palms in resignation. This must be quite a request. Come on and tell me before I die from curiosity. The old man held both hands on his heart, feigning an attack. Noble bit her lip to smother her smile at the older teacher's antics. She shrugged. It's not that important, and after the build-up you just gave, it may end up being a letdown. I was given a memory by a student to research for her, and I thought you might be able to help me with the runes. Ah, a memory then is it? Julius tapped his chin. Well, you are in luck. I just so happen to be free right now. The brunette professor somehow doubted that he had nothing else to do, but she chose to take his obvious preference for helping her as the gift that it was. She pulled out the papers from her satchel and held them to her chest. The memory is called the portcullis key, but most of the rest of the words are just question marks. That is uncommon but not unheard of. When there is no exact translation for a word from the runic language, the spell seems content to leave things a mystery. Julius had spent the better part of his life learning the intricacies of runes. Like translating from any other dead language, some things just did not have a current counterpart. It doesn't even have a proper type or rank. Julius eyed her carefully for a moment. Such a thing has happened before. There's more. The runes look rewritten. Noble sucked in a deep breath. She knew how crazy her words sounded. Fortunately, the old teacher did not laugh at her. As a mundane robot cleared away the plates onto the motorized tray, he looked at the beautiful lady across from him in contemplative silence. As soon as the food and robotic busboy were gone, Noble slid the pile of papers across the table to her mentor. I had to scan it for more information, but this is what was spat out. My android says it is not a mistake. Julius looked at the pages one after the other. The longer he stared, the more intensely his bushy eyebrows came together. Minutes passed. He pulled out a pen from his shirt pocket and began making notes in the margin as he underlined different lines of script. The memory has one enchantment. Julius asked suddenly, startling Noble with the comment. She peeked over to view the page he was observing. As far as I can tell, there is only one set of information under that heading at least. And what of the runes you see on the memory? Can you write them down for me? Julius passed over the pen, but Noble was already reaching into her bag for a writing utensil and more paper. She placed the synthetic pencil against the page and began scribbling feverishly. Closing her eyes periodically to focus on the memory's runes, Noble separated the hidden runes from the ones that overlaid them. Then, with extra care, the professor drew how they looked as they pulsed overlapping one another. She passed over the 3 groups of text to the waiting teacher. This set is underneath the other but not fully gone. I left spaces where I couldn't quite make out the lower rune. In this is what they look like combined. Noble held her breath. Another long silence ensued between them. I think, Julius paused. What is it? The woman bit her tongue to stop badgering her mentor. Julius lowered his voice. A single word escaped his lips. A strange word that Noble had not expected to hear. Sorcery. You mean someone with a sorcery aspect did this? The professor thought of the great Fireshing and her ability to throw fire. I'm not talking about aspects. I'm talking about true sorcery. Julius lowered his voice to barely a whisper. What? Noble did not believe her ears. Was he serious? You don't mean those webtoons where the guy has a pointy hat and a wand? Julius could not help but chuckle. Not that kind of sorcery, no. Tell me, what did your student do to get this memory? The question was worded oddly. Shouldn't he have asked what creature Catfine killed? But she hadn't killed a nightmare creature, and somehow Julius knew it. Sleeper Catfine said she was walking along in the sand and something cracked beneath her feet. Then the spell told her she gained a memory. It made no mention of a kill. That only seems to confirm my initial thinking. Julius blew out his cheeks. I think we have spoken about as much as we can hear. The sanitizer seems rather anxious to finish cleaning our table. Glancing to the side, Noble could confirm his observation. Another tiny robot with a cloth was humming softly at the edge of the table, but the professor couldn't help but feel that Julius was more interested in gaining some privacy than he was about the unfinished job. Ah yes, how thoughtless of us. We really should be going. She smiled apologetically and stood from the lacquered table. The pair gathered up the papers and began the walk back towards Julius's classroom. Once they were more or less alone, the old man finally opened up with what was on his mind. Sorcery in webtoons is an excuse to do things that would otherwise be impossible. I suppose that is one definition of the word. But there is another meaning which is closer to my intention. I am talking of something that extends science beyond its known boundaries. It manipulates the very fabric of something's being. Julius's reverent tone put Noble in a somber mood. So you think someone who can manipulate in such a way as sorcerer made this memory? Noble was having trouble with this information. Though she wasn't sure why she was. Nothing else about the spell or the dream realm was fully logical. Why should this be? I don't think they made the memory, but they are the one who changed it. And not well, it seems, or you wouldn't see the changes at all. Julius glanced down at the papers in his hands as he chewed on his lip. Then how would Cat have gotten a hold of it? Noble wasn't about to let her confusion on sorcery stop her from asking more logical questions. The old man shrugged. It wouldn't be the first memory to exist outside of a person. Because she was in a nightmare, perhaps the sorcerer was still alive. Maybe he dropped it or left it behind for a new master to acquire. Or, and this is just as likely if not more so, the sorcerer died while the memory was summoned and the overlaid runes prevented the memory from being destroyed with its owner. Which meant your student was able to absorb it when she stepped on top of it. That is quite a theory. Noble wondered if the story had come from some past research on the dream realm or if this really was something from Julius's own head. The teacher tapped his finger beside his nose. Yes, well, you haven't given me too much to go on, you know. I don't suppose I could talk to this student and get her version of events. Noble pursed her lips. I will reach out, but I am not sure she wants to relive her nightmare by talking about it. Few do. For some, they are even more personal than their flaw. Julius sighed. While he could sympathize and affirm that the trauma was very real, he also lamented information that was lost as a result. At any rate, I will look over what I have and see what I can do with it. Would you prefer I send it to your communicator or bring you a copy of what I find? If it isn't anything specific, the communicator is fine. I prefer the more juicy information in print as always. Noble pretended not to notice Julius's smirk. Still paranoid, I see. Noble was unapologetic on that front. If you had seen some of the things I have over the years, you would be paranoid too. My father taught me to always be careful. They came to the old man's classroom and stopped outside the door. A bit of caution is worth a ton of regret. Julius gave a sagely nod and then grinned. He patted the woman on the arm gently. I will get back to you as soon as I can. I may actually have a book or two for you to read later this afternoon or tomorrow. No hurry, I have an appointment later this afternoon anyway. Tomorrow would be the earliest I could look through it. Noble bowed her head respectfully to her colleague. Thank you, for everything. Julius held his hand to his chest. Of course, always happy to help a student. That goes for former students too. Turning away, Noble set her feet down the hall in the opposite direction of her classroom. The dedicated teacher had given her an idea. While her gut told her not to look too much into the memory with her own communicator, there was a place where she could look at research on a public device. The Academy's library. Walking between the buildings, Noble relished the soft wind against her skin. While being outside made the forever floating awakened slightly nervous, she still could appreciate the sun and the filtered air. It reminded her of simpler times. Back when her knowledge of the spell was from webtoons. Before the Category 5 gate opened and destroyed her home, her continent, and the life she knew. But that was in the past, and she was far enough removed that she could look on that time fondly. It had been a happy time. After a quarter of an hour, Noble finally reached a square alabaster building. It bore the same smooth, pristine alloy walls of the rest of the academy. The shutters of the large windows were opened wide to allow as much natural light inside as possible, but still be able to be slammed shut at a moment's notice. The automatic door swished open and shut to admit the awakened professor, and Noble was hit with the smell of synthetic paper. Well, it was more what real paper should smell like. Some dedicated soul had found a way to replicate the smell of old books and piped it into the library. While few could appreciate the personal touch, it did give the building a more welcoming feel. All around, shelves of books stretched toward the tall ceiling and back to the far walls. Thousands and thousands of tomes of information, some current and some considered ancient. Tables between the shelves allowed sleepers, awakened, and even a few mundane people a place to study what was hidden in these pages. There were quite a few students using terminals both to take notes and access information. She looked over and saw a lone student taking notes by hand. A kindred spirit. Noble smiled at him when he looked up. Strange sunglasses covered his misty eyes. The professor recognized him as someone who had taken her class a couple of years before. And a smart kid too. Hello, Dane, the professor whispered as she passed. Professor Noble. The young man nodded at her in recognition before returning to the page. He seemed very absorbed in his work, and Noble was willing to let him be. Taking one more deep breath, Noble enjoyed the moment of quiet. If not for being a professor, the awakened would easily have settled for being a librarian instead. There was something soothing about so much adventure being so close at hand. But the moment passed quickly and Noble glided to the help desk and the two individuals waiting there. One of them had foregone the chair and was sitting on the desk itself while engrossed in a book. The young person's short, dark hair fell forward as two brown eyes focused intensely on the page. A delicate hand blocked part of the title, but Noble could make out the words, Guardian, and Rinley. I know that book. Noble smiled. Nice choice. The second individual was tall and handsome, wearing a gray vest with a button-down shirt underneath. Many of the ladies in the library were stealing glances at him, but the librarian pretended he did not notice the attention. Instead, he looked the professor dead in the eye with a friendly smirk on his face. Hello, Noble, he said. To what do I owe the pleasure? What else, Nickel? Noble chuckled ominously. I've come to interrogate you. Nickel stared blankly at the professor for a moment, trying to discern if she were serious. Her husband worked for the government, so there was a slim chance she meant what she said. How could she possibly know? There's no way. The enigmatic librarian pushed away the thought. His mouth twisted with amusement. Ah, so you are another fan who has come in search of my autograph. I am afraid I will have to charge you for it. Cannot be giving unorganized laundry merchandise away for free. Congratulations to you and Ren, I mean Izayoi_ni, on your resounding victory. I had expected a lot more people to be around after you were crowned champions yesterday. Although Noble had been unable to watch most of their battles during the tournament, she had seen the fearsome duo fight before. It was no surprise to her that they had won. We had a large crowd this morning, but Ren chased them off. Nickel scoffed. Only a few were brave enough to stick around and pretend to read. The handsome young man cut his eyes toward two of the library's guests. The ladies ducked back behind two books and began to gossip quietly. A library is for reading, not for signing autographs, Ren said without looking away from her text. The mysterious keeper of books always seemed to be listening even while reading. I think you should be enjoying your victory, Ren, Noble countered. We need some light in these dark times. I am sure the library would not begrudge you having some adoring fans around to keep the old books company. See, Noble gets it. Nickel had obviously had a similar conversation with his battlemate before. Clearly, he had lost. A library is sacred. Ren would not yield. I respect both your logic and your fighting skills. Noble held up her hands in surrender. At least I am unbeatable on the battlefield, Nickel said with a glance at Ren. And I plan to keep it that way. Oh, are you retiring at such a young age? Noble crossed her arms, clearly amused. Nickel pursed his lips. No, I am already looking forward to the next tournament. Only a fool rests on his past victories. That's true, Ren agreed, turning the page of the book without glancing up. Nickel lowered his voice to a whisper. I am already thinking about recruiting a third member. I am happy the way things are, Ren snorted. Why change what works? Because you are either growing or dying. I would rather be growing, wouldn't you? The duelist known as Unorganized Laundry waited for his counterpart's response, but it seemed he had gained a point. Did you have someone in mind? Noble tried to keep her face neutral. It isn't good to fish for flattery, she reminded herself. I did, actually, Nickel smirked. He paused for dramatic effect until Noble could take it no longer. Care to tell me who? She looked at her nails nonchalantly. But awakened Nickel saw the slight twitch in her eye and the subtle change in her breathing. The professor was very interested indeed. Nick's extra-wide field of vision provided by his aspect told him that Ren had stopped reading and looked up from the book. He had both their undivided attention. Nickel clicked his tongue. Well, it is of course nothing official, but the guy goes by the name of Loaf. He is exceptionally fast and I think he would be a good complement to our existing skills. Noble narrowed her gaze, both suspicious and secretly disappointed. I suppose your interest in Loaf has nothing to do with the fact that he made Mongrel bleed. Nickel rubbed his chin. Loaf is talented. I want only the best for my team. Your team? Ren raised both eyebrows. The book snapped shut. Our team, Ren. Nickel corrected himself. Nothing but the best for our team. The professor chuckled softly. If you want the best, I'm surprised you didn't ask Mongrel himself to join you. Maybe I should, Nickel shrugged. But that seems unfair to everyone else. He is probably the only one who could remotely put up a challenge for us. Even then it wouldn't be much of one. Shaking her head, Noble patted her bun. Getting overly confident, aren't you? You know what they say about pride. The professor saw Ren's expression change slightly. Of course, Ren knew the saying. The mysterious awakened seemed to know just about everything. Ren's aspect allowed for the intake and retention of information on a staggering scale. If there was a proverb or adage, Ren knew it and could repeat it in the blink of an eye. Name one group who put up any resistance to us in the last tournament, Nickel challenged, crossing his arms. Noble knew she could not. They had obliterated the competition. Perhaps a new group. Why am I having this conversation? Just let it go. But there was a stubborn streak in her. A new group might surprise you. Unless the new group includes someone like QueenBee or Mongrel, I'm not interested in your wild speculation. Nickel waved his hand in the air flippantly. Oh, Noble smiled innocently. Seeing something in the way her mouth turned upward, Nickel furrowed his brow. Wait, have you heard something? Is one of them forming a group? I don't think Mongrel is the type to form a group. Noble shook her finger with conviction. Nickel grunted. Be then. I knew it. That queen gets dethroned and already she is eyeing a new title. I never said that, but Noble knew she didn't have to. The idea was already in Nickel's head. You really shouldn't listen to rumors, Nick. We will have to up our training, the observant awakened said to the other librarian. Ren nodded. That seems reasonable. The crossed-legged librarian looked at Noble with curious eyes. You said you came to the library to interrogate Nickel. Was that a joke? Oh that, not really, I do have questions. I am looking for information, on memories. Noble missed the rain of sparks forming under the help desk in Nickel's hands before he relaxed and dismissed the memory. The handsome librarian leaned back casually in his chair. What can we help you find, Professor? Do you have any books or research on memories that are missing key information in the runes? Many, Ren answered easily. 7,692 books that address missing runes and more than 10 times that when it comes to articles. I haven't looked today on that particular topic so I cannot give you an accurate number just now. Ren's aspect, Knowledge Keeper, allowed the awakened to collect and process more information in a day than a mundane human could in a lifetime. Her thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and the library was a perfect place for any awakened to constantly fill their receptive mind with information. I need to narrow that down a bit. Noble bit her lip. How about texts on memories with no known type or rank? Ren's eyes shut for a moment. Memories with no known rank or type are exceedingly rare. Of those that have been reported, most have proved to be a misunderstanding on the part of the wielder. When the spell first descended on the world. Yes, that sounds like it might be helpful. Noble cut off the librarian before the entire passage was quoted from memory. The professor preferred to read it for herself. Shrugging, Ren wrote down the location of the book as well as 2 others. I can set up a station with articles if you like. Thanks, Ren, I would really appreciate that. Noble dipped her head. I'll take you to the books. Nickel stood in motion for the professor to follow. Together they snaked through the shelves past the general reading material to the more specialized area. Nickel cleared his throat. Where did you hear the rumor about Queen Bee? He asked. The professor smiled. She had gotten into his head. Rumor? What rumor? I didn't say I had heard any rumor. You implied it, Noble. I may not be Ren, but I can remember what happened a few minutes ago. The charismatic librarian pulled out a book off of the shelf and peeked through to the next aisle, startling the amorous couple residing there. Go find another place to make out. This is a library, not a club. He replaced the book and shook his head. His eyes rolled upward in disgust. Wow, that was annoying. I could hear their kissing almost as soon as we left the help desk. Nickel's hypersensitivity allowed him to see every twitch, blink, or hint of movement in battle. The powerful aspect was invaluable in a duel as it allowed him to predict the moves of his opponent. But it also meant he could hear and often see things that he wished he hadn't. Ren's vast store of knowledge of combat techniques and Nickel's uncanny ability to sense the opponent's movement almost before they made it was a fearsome combination. The two were almost unstoppable. Almost. Now, where did you say that you heard the rumor about Queen Bee? The librarian slowed his pace. His silent movements were eerie even for Noble, who hadn't had her own feet touch the floor in almost 2 decades. I didn't hear any rumor, she answered in a sing-song lilt. But you know something. I can see it in the way you are trying not to smile. Every muscle in your face is tense because you are struggling so much. I hate it when you do that, Nickel. I had no idea you were so afraid of Queen Bee. PSH, I am not. The younger awakened waved away the comment. I just like to be the first to know things, that's all. If you say so. Noble pressed her lips together. Of course, she had no intention of joining the group competition now or any time in the future. To do that, Noble would have to find a partner or cohort, and that would most likely mean revealing her identity on accident or on purpose. It wasn't worth the risk. Finally, they reached the designated section and Nickel gathered the books on the list. He handed them to the professor with a scowl. Let the bee come. She doesn't know who she is messing with. You'd be surprised. Fortunately, she didn't have to answer. The librarian had already disappeared without a trace. Of course, Nickel would discover her joke the moment he opened his communication device and found nothing about Queen Bee's intentions for next year. Until then, let him sweat a little. Noble turned to the books in her hand. It would be her responsibility to put them back on the shelf unless she wanted to take them to her classroom, so it was probably a good idea to see if they were even remotely what she wanted. Locating the nearest table, the professor hovered over a chair and set down the books. She opened the first one and thumbed through the pages. It did indeed have information regarding memories of all shapes and kinds, but the section on unknown runes was sorely lacking. It was an older book about 10 years, and some of the information it gave was only partially true anyway. Noble set it aside. The second book made the professor nearly choke. I don't think this will be helpful at all. Ren had written down the title and the location of the book for Nickel to find but had neglected to register one crucial detail. A compilation of memories and their uses by Professor Noble. I mean, I am one of the foremost experts on memories, so it would have been useful to anyone else. Still, Noble decided to at least peruse the pages of her own work. Perhaps it would jog her memory in some way that a fresh text would not. Alas, her search was in vain. She felt in no better shape than when she began. The third title held more promise. Noble ran her finger across the lines as she read. Some believed that the magicians of Nightmare Realm had immense power. A sleeper who apprenticed under one of these mighty beings claimed he could alter the very core of an object. Normally Noble would have dismissed the vague nature of the words. People who had been through trauma, which included all who had been through a nightmare in the dream realm, could easily exaggerate a claim thinking it was true. This was why, even though Noble had heard claims of sorcery before, the word always rang empty in the end, until now. A magician could be another word for a sorcerer, right? It sounds very close to what Julius described. Noble felt a buzz and looked at her communicator. Oh, where did the time go? Placing the book under one arm, the awakened professor put back the other 2 volumes and headed toward the front of the building. As promised, Ren had set up a station so that she could peruse the Academy's articles in a small cubicle in peace. There were a few advantages to using the library's screens over her own handheld communicator or datapad. For one, the larger area allowed Noble to see more information at one time and even compare documents by splitting the screen. Secondly, the library had access to things that regular communicators did not. The Academy had its own server and set of documents. The massive store of information was not available to the general public. Some of the things contained in the research were too technical and boring for mundane humans to care. Other information in the wrong hands could prove potentially dangerous. So terminals like this were the only way such information could be accessed. The third reason was quite simple. Noble didn't want her inquiry attached to her communicator or even her classroom. Until she knew what was in her possession, the professor didn't want anyone coming around asking questions. The clans and government were always subtly vying for important resources. Most likely this memory wasn't important, but if it were, it is probably broken. Noble shook off her bleak thoughts. If that is true, then no one will want it. When holding it in her soul sea, the awakened hadn't felt the normal pull from the memory which she usually did. Noble had not felt any urge to use it a certain way or experience any instinct on how it should function. Being broken was one explanation, but it was not the only one, and that is why Noble felt the need to be careful. Ren had been right. There were tens of thousands of bits of information on memories with untranslated runes. Some were more vague than others, depending on the awakened that provided the knowledge. Unfortunately, a lot of the articles were on the same handful of memories, so the facts became repetitive after a time. Only a few of the pieces seemed worth getting a synthetic copy. Nickel brought her the selection from the front desk. "Is this for a paper?" he asked, only mildly curious. "Maybe in the future. If the memory turned out to be interesting but not valuable or dangerous, it could easily become part of a research paper worth a few contribution points. For now, that was not her priority. Right now I am just helping out a student." Nick raised one eyebrow. "So you are just doing this out of the goodness of your heart?" "Teachers are weird." Noble chuckled. "I've been called worse." Tucking the papers into her bag, Noble signed out the book and headed out of the library. Not just anyone could remove the books from the repository of knowledge, but the professor had already gained permission a long time ago. Not that anyone would have realistically tried to stop her if she had tried to take it. Even though Noble was not known as a fighter, she still gave off an impressive presence that few wanted to confront. Looking down at her communicator, Noble quickened her stride. Time was getting away from her and she didn't want to be late. "It would be faster if you went full speed," she told herself with a wry smile. Although her movement was more levitating than true flying, Noble could still move at a rapid pace. But as her top speed was much faster than a person could reasonably walk, the ability of her feet to feign movement along the ground would appear not only awkward but suspicious. Noble preferred her flaw to remain a secret, so it was better to be a tad late than to risk traveling more quickly. "I can make it." The professor hurried to her room to drop off her bag. As she came out in a burst of speed, she passed a student with bright orange hair. "Professor Noble." Taking a deep breath, the awakened put on her best smile. "Can I help you?" The woman struggled for his name. The one that came to mind couldn't possibly be right. "I need help with a memory." The young man dipped his head. The corners of her mouth became strained. Despite Noble's shrinking time window, she could never turn away a student in need of assistance. What if that memory was the key to their life or death in the dream realm? There was no way the professor could let another life be on her conscience. Seb's youthful face flashed across her memory. He probably would have loved having brightly colored hair if she had ever allowed it. "A memory, you say? Then you are in the right place. Come in." Noble led the young man over to her desk. "Do you need it analyzed or do you have a specific question?" "I don't think I need it analyzed. I just need a safe spot to mess with my bright little trinket where I will not blind anyone." "Then, by all means, use my chamber. It has a reflective coating inside so you will not bother me." Noble relaxed a little. It seemed she wouldn't be needed for guidance, only supervision. "How long do you think you will be?" "I do have an appointment to attend here shortly." Surely it couldn't hurt to put a time limit on the student. At worst, B2 could monitor him to make sure he didn't end up in too much trouble. It shouldn't take long. The young man eagerly hopped into the structure and closed the clear polymer door. Through spelltech, Noble could hear what was going on inside of the chamber even though nothing could escape the protective walls. The young man was mumbling to himself as he summoned the memory into existence. Sparks of light formed around his face as a visor appeared. The sleeper's eyes were suddenly hidden by a shortened helmet with a symbol resembling a rainbow on the forehead. Noble watched curiously to see what he would do next. The young man focused and suddenly the entire chamber was infused with light. Red, then blue, then green. Finally, the entire area contained within the polymer walls was bathed in the same hue of orange as the young man's hair. The air itself seemed to glow with the help of the fluorescent mask. But the student was not done with his little experiment, it seemed. Another set of sparks filled the air and manifested in his left palm. Noble blinked a few times, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The memory looked like a pewter platter and on it was a piece of pie. What on earth? The light morphed and focused until all of it was aimed directly at the morsel of food. Then a sudden flash of light caused the dessert to take on the color of the beam. The pie was now orange. The task complete, the student dismissed the visor and exited the chamber. Thank you for your help. I will be on my way now. Wait, you did all that for pie? Noble was struggling to understand. Not just any pie, orange pie. The young man looked quite serious. Was he hearing himself? The sleeper continued while holding up the platter. My bountiful feast only reproduces the last thing I ate, and I ate cherry pie. But orange is so much better. So I used my light bender to fix it. He tapped on his head where the visor had been. The professor opened and shut her mouth a couple of times. But you only changed the color. You didn't change the contents of the pie. I don't understand your point. Anyway, thank you, Professor. Noble blinked a few times. You are welcome, Tan. The young man at last provided his name. You are very welcome, Tan. A boy named Tan, making things orange. A thought struck her. Is Tan short for tangerine? Tan cocked his head to one side. Yes, but only my mother calls me that. Why? No reason. Noble shook her head innocently. I am sure she thinks you are quite a peach. Shrugging, the boy looked down at his food. I suppose, thanks again. I better go before the pie gets cold. Watch that man go. He peeled out of here real quick. Noble caught herself. She looked at her communicator and paled. Suddenly all the fruit jokes had lost their appeal. I'm so sorry. Noble hurried through the door. I know. Sarai waved her communicator in the air. I got your message. Don't worry too much. But we've been looking forward to this day for weeks. The professor could not just let the matter go so easily. Although around a decade separated the two ladies' ages, they were more like sisters than friends. Clicking her tongue, Sarai dismissed the objection easily. I was a sleeper once too. So many doubts and insecurities. It was nice of you not to leave them hanging. I am curious though, what exactly did they want? Noble looked her friend dead in the eye and shrugged. Pie. Sarai wrinkled her nose. Is that a euphemism for something? Seeing the confused look on the redhead's face, the professor shook her head. No, actual pie. I am just as befuddled as you. Maybe he has a sweet tooth. The baker suggested. Noble rolled her eyes. An orange tooth more like it. I didn't know teeth came in that color. Sarai laughed lightly. Now I am in the mood to make pie myself. Maybe later I will. Are you ready to get started? The fearsome warrior was already clad in her modest red tunic. Instead of heavy-plated armor, the lovely baker wore a simple cuirass around her torso. The leather was deceptively strong and more durable than most any weapon that could land a hit. Not that many weapons got a chance. Just a second, I didn't have time to get ready. Noble stowed her communicator on a table behind a protective half-wall and took off her suit jacket. She rolled her shoulders experimentally. You sure you don't want to change into something more flexible? You might rip your skirt. I don't want to waste any more time, Noble argued. I'll figure it out. The professor focused for a moment. Which armor should she use? Against her friend's aspect, there were a few solid options. Her husband really did spoil her when it came to acquiring memories. She also had been known to trade in the contribution points for her own research to gain a few special items. I know just what to choose. Light surrounded Noble as her blouse disappeared behind a silver breastplate and a bronze placard. The rest of the metallic suit wove into an intricate pattern down her body ending in two pointed sabatons on her feet. Noble had chosen it because it was incredibly resilient as well as moderately flexible. It was not as good as her Queen Bee armor, but it would hopefully suffice. Instructor Rock actually had an entire building full of training areas which he oversaw. This was only one of the many arenas available for use. Noble had gotten word on the way over that the larger evaluation room was being used, so they had to switch to a smaller dojo to spar. Noble stepped into the circular area of the mat with a grin on her unhelmeted face. Ready. The ruby tear, a thin longsword, manifested in the professor's hand. It was not her favorite weapon, which was the more slender estoc, but Noble could use the skills she gained today and transfer them as needed. Show me what Fanfiction can do. The hovering woman challenged. Sarai smiled, one corner of her mouth tilting slightly higher than the other. The baker's clear blue eyes shone with intensity. A light spear formed in her hand amid a rain of sparks. Noble recognized the aching ember immediately. It was the lithe warrior's signature weapon. Stepping into the ring, Sarai wore a slightly quizzical expression. Are you not worried about your hair? Or do you think I'll go easy on you if you leave it uncovered? What? Oh. Noble reached up and touched her tightly wound bun. With a nod of thanks, she summoned a small cap. This memory was not armor, but a utility type that resembled the bell of a tentacled sea creature. The gelatinous blob that now surrounded the top of her head was temperature-resistant and strangely soothing. It was Noble's turn to smile menacingly. Bring your worst. Sarai needed no further encouragement. The tip of her spear glowed red-hot and ignited in barely an instant. Lunging to one side, Noble felt the heat of the fireball on her skin as it passed less than a centimeter from her face. The professor was very glad the training arena was made to withstand all types of attacks. Otherwise, she would have needed to have a very awkward conversation with Instructor Rock on why his dojo was suddenly on fire. Instead, the flames dissipated as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind a faint charred stench. Noble did not have time to think about what part of her clothing must have gotten singed. Already she was planning her attack. Sarai's sorcery aspect allowed her to produce fire from her body, but the special qualities of her spear allowed her to channel that inferno and send it speeding toward her opponent. The ranged attack had been particularly effective in the dream realm. Between the deadly reach of her spear and the conflagrations she created, all but two she encountered fell at her feet in the dreamscape. The same person who had beaten Fanfiction had bested Queen Bee, so Noble really could not fault her for not getting further in the tournament. Mongrel had been unstoppable, but Noble was quickly realizing just how difficult his journey to the top had been. Sarai's movements were quick and fluid, her freckled face was tense with unwavering concentration. Noble could not help but marvel at how the tunic flowed and spun but never got in the way of the beautiful warrior or her potent flames. That was not to say Noble was watching idly. Far from it. The skilled awakened was dodging Sarai's attacks and biding her time. Noble had many more years of experience, but she was always keen to learn something new. In fact, one of the key moves she had used to evade Mongrel had been a variation on something which she had gleaned from sparring with the woman before her. Noble took bits of every fighting style she encountered and studied it. The more knowledge Noble acquired, the more she wanted. This was the reason why Queen Bee had been able to match and counter Mongrel's style for so long. Both by studying and practicing. Though, in theory, the professor would be better able to study if she weren't trying to keep her body from being burned to a crisp. Whoa! The tip of the aching ember, white-hot with flame, nearly impaled Noble's torso. She glided backward with 2 pretend steps. You know this is a sparring match, not an actual duel to the death, right? The professor's eyes flickered slightly with both fear and amusement. You said to do your worst, Sarai shrugged, unconcerned. The baker knew her friend could take the heat. I must admit you've gotten much better since our last bout of sparring. Noble made a downward stroke at the spear, the ruby blade running down the length of the shaft until Sarai disengaged. I can see that. You are giving me more than half your effort this time. The lady with the auburn hair leapt back as a deadly slice threatened to cleave her in two. The women began a more deadly dance, each attack more calculated and elegant than the last. Finally, Noble saw an opening too wide to ignore. Sarai had let her guard down and left her neck wide open for a killing stroke. Of course, Noble had no intention of murdering her friend, but she could not let the mistake go unanswered. The professor leaned away as if to retreat. But it was a feint. Mid-movement, she shifted her energy and surged forward. Closing the gap between them suddenly, Noble took ruby tear in both hands. She struck with the broad side of the blade hard enough to send a tremor down through the length of the unbreakable ember. The sudden jolt surprised Sarai. Her hand instinctively released the shaft in order to keep her arm from breaking. With a sweeping kick, Noble brought the other warrior to the ground. The professor held the crimson longsword against Sarai's flawless neck. Your weapon needs to be both offensive and defensive at all times, the professor cautioned her. Even when she was not in class, she could not help but teach those around her. Never let your guard down. Noted, thank you, Sarai answered without any animosity. In fact, she seemed rather pleased with herself. By the way, have you seen the news? Noble faltered, confused by the sudden change of topic. Not since this morning, she answered carefully. The baker's auburn ponytail shifted as she laughed lightly. You'll never guess who is going to join the group competition in the next Dreamscape tournament. Queen Bee. What? Noble's eyes went wide as her mind spun. I made no such announcement. Seeing her moment, Sarai pulled her knees to her chest. Like a sprung trap, the fiery woman kicked Noble in the stomach and reached for her spear. The movement was so swift and seamless, that the professor had no time to react. Before she knew it, Sarai was pinning her to the ground. Never let your guard down. Sarai winked as she pointed her spear at the professor's chest. The agile awakened pressed her foot against her opponent's stomach, pushing Noble's armor against the ground. You got me, Noble admitted through clenched teeth. She bit down the scream, clawing to escape her lips. Pain radiated through her entire being. If she did not get up soon, it was very possible that her bones might shatter from the pressure being put on them. Sweat formed on her brow. Noticing the change, Sarai quickly got off Noble and reached to help her stand. Did I hurt you? Breathing heavily, the professor waved off the other's concern. Not you, no. In truth, the woman felt nauseated enough to vomit, but her awakened constitution allowed her to handle the feeling without giving in to it. She moved quickly to the table where her communicator was and located her water bottle. Taking a sip, Noble steadied her stomach. I had no idea that breaking news would affect you so much. Sarai came over and rubbed the back of her friend's polished armor. I must admit it did surprise me. Not that it matters, but where did you see it? The professor wanted anything to get her mind off her pain, and she was curious about Sarai's source. Seeing that the sparring was over, Sarai dismissed her outer tunic and allowed the light purple workout clothes underneath to show. She reached for her personal communicator and scrolled through a few pages. Here, leaning against the wall, Noble looked down at the communicator. Queen Bee throws her estoc into the group tournament. She read. The professor glanced at the byline. Unfortunately, it was Frey, a reporter for the paper Noteworthy who rarely got things wrong. Noble had actually seen him pay to be in the Dreamscape audience so he could both see and be seen. The dark-haired man was tenacious, always taking note of even the smallest detail. Noble sighed and reluctantly read on. Sources revealed that Queen Bee is planning to enter the next Dreamscape competition, as part of a group. This nonsense-free reporter has uncovered rumors that after losing her undefeated streak to Lord Mongrel, the Queen of the Dreamscape has set her sights on a new challenge, the team tournament. Awakened Nickel, who goes by the moniker Unorganized Laundry in the Dreamscape, went on record to say, Queen Bee wants to enter the ring with her stinger. She better hit the books. Comprised of Nickel and his partner Awakened Ren, known by fans as Izuyoi_Ni, the librarians were an unstoppable force in the most recent championship. Now they may at last have some real competition. The question is, who will our noble queen choose as part of her court? Will it be someone tenacious like the combat master Shadow Saint? Or perhaps someone subtle like the fair but fierce Goldie Rider? Who knows? The vivacious queen might surprise us and bring a newcomer to the scene. No matter what, you can bet we will be reporting. Having gotten the gist, Noble skimmed the rest. She bit the inside of her cheek, trying to keep herself from showing how she felt. Inside, the professor was furious. Nickel, there was no doubt in the Akakenid's mind who had tipped off the reporter. She had conveniently forgotten how well connected the young librarian was with the media. I'm going to murder him. Noble was livid for letting the prank she pulled backfire so miserably. If not for the fact that Nickel had never given her any indication that he even suspected that she was the woman behind the mask, Noble would have been inclined to believe the librarian had done it just to get back at her. But since Nickel was oblivious to her hidden identity, what was his aim? Had Unorganized Laundry intended to scare Queen Bee out of entering? Were this the case, the reporter had done Nickel a great disservice. If the fearsome fighter was trying to push the queen into joining the tournament, his tactic was more reasonable. Now it would be hard for the noble to deny the claim without actually saying something publicly. That duelist doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. Noble's body tensed, ready for a battle. Noticing the sudden change, Sarai took back her communicator and stared quizzically at her friend. Finally, the auburn-haired baker broke the silence. So, Sarai drawled, are you going to enter the group competition? Noble blinked a couple of times. Why would I do that? She managed to keep her voice neutral, but just barely. Anyway, I thought we were talking about Queen Bee. Sarai snorted. She took a sip from her thermos. I was. The professor straightened her back and rolled her shoulders. She moved back towards the ring, which despite the resistant fabric still had slight scorch marks riddling it. I don't know what you are implying, but I think I am ready for another round of sparring. Are we really not going to talk about it? Sarai placed her hands on her hips. What? The professor hoped that it would all blow over. Ask enough questions and people usually give up. Hadn't her own children used that tactic more times than she could count? That move that Queen Bee made. The younger awakened raised her eyebrows. Which one? Noble cocked her head to one side. Was it her or was the room getting steadily warmer? The one where she leaned back and then pivoted to dash in and nearly took out Mongrel. Pretending she was holding her spear, Sarai swayed agilely to demonstrate. Ah, okay, I think I know when you are talking about. What about it? Noble nodded, pretending she was interested. You did the same move just a moment ago to finish the fight. The redhead crossed her arms. Stroking her chin, Noble hummed softly. Did I? You did. Sarai narrowed her gaze. The professor furrowed her brow. Are you sure? Tapping her foot, the graceful baker pursed her lips. I'm positive. We both know I taught you that move. It was one of the first tricks I learned to do with my aching ember. Granted, you adapted the method for your sword, but the basic mechanics are still there. That's fascinating. Are you ready to spar now? Noble tried one last time before dropping her hands helplessly at her side. Fine. She lowered her voice. How long have you known? Happy that her friend finally let her in, Sarai grinned. Well, I've suspected it for a long time. But every time I looked at Queen Bee directly, doubt crept in. It is my mask. It causes people who know the wearer to doubt their identity. Noble glanced toward the door to make sure it was shut. Then she dismissed the aquatic hat before summoning the fraudulent facade. Sparks covered the lower half of her face as the gold and silver wove itself into a delicate design. Sarai instantly felt her thinking shift. Questions about who the woman before her was intruded on her thoughts. That explains a lot, the redhead said as she pushed aside the doubts. The strange invasion on her psyche quickly subsided. It shouldn't work on you now that I have told you. Fort has no trouble seeing through the disguise. Noble's voice sounded only slightly distorted through the mask. That's fascinating. You know, I've been trying to challenge Queen Bee in the Dreamscape for months, but somehow she always finishes up a battle and leaves before I have a chance. I found that in itself curious. I was afraid I would forget myself and speak to you, Noble admitted. And what about your eyes? Are they due to another memory? Sarai looked like a child being told a bedtime story. Now that she had gotten the truth, she wanted all of it. No, they already changed slightly before I was ever infected. The colors were based on my mood. But when I awakened, they went to a whole other level, shifting almost constantly. And when I use my other ability, they go truly wild. Sarai had never heard Noble talk about her secondary ability. All she knew was that Noble could make things float. Not that the baker went around bragging about her different skills. Although all those who became fully awakened had two abilities, it was not really something people often discussed. Sarai herself had gained the ability to harness energy and project it in a desired direction. That was how she was now able to throw fireballs and light the tip of her spear. Before that, her hands and body could only deal the deadly flames directly. I am quite curious. What is the ability? Sarai hoped the question was not too personal. I could tell you. Noble gave a ghost of a smile. But it is probably easier if I show you instead. Noble reached up and released the bun from her hair. Chestnut tendrils slid from their confinement and draped across her shoulders in waves. Then, dismissing the practice suit, Noble summoned Queen Bee's armor. Around her body, sparks bathed her in a brilliant light as lustrous metal wove and took form. Her golden breastplate, greaves, and gauntlets were striped with black accents, giving the bee her iconic look. Underneath, a soft purple peeked out between the metal armor, looking as soft and malleable as it was strong. Everything about the woman changed. The calm, collected professor was replaced by an imposing warrior. It was as if Noble had vanished before Sarai's eyes. The awakened who was here now had an oppressive aura and a commanding presence. Only the blue eyes of her friend remained. Then they vanished too. Queen Bee's eyes began to shift from blue to green to purple. They were two ever-shifting kaleidoscopes of colors, never staying in the same hue long enough to be named. Mesmerizing. Sarai felt drawn into them with an abnormal pull. Not exactly. Bee raised one eyebrow, her smile hidden behind the half-mask. Keep watching. The redhead started to question when Bee's swirling eyes lit with an otherworldly glow. The sparks which usually indicated the summoning of a memory seemed trapped within her irises. Oh, a strange sensation pressed upon Sarai's mind. It was enticing, pulling her toward a feeling of elation. Although Sarai could fight it, she found she didn't want to. She gave in, and let the feeling of bliss wash over her. Adding her own happiness into the mix, the emotion was pure joy. Whoa! Sarai placed her hand on her heart, suddenly dizzy with delight. The extra endorphins flooding her system quickly subsided. Are you all right? Noble's eyes cleared to blue. Fine, the redhead answered, still reeling. That is one heck of an ability. Sorry, you got an extra strong dose because you were looking at me. I usually close my eyes when I do it to lessen the effect. Noble didn't need to see the person to affect them. The professor merely needed to have seen them and be in relatively close proximity to the person for the emotion to be effective. The closer the person was, the more persuasive the feeling would be. Can you project all emotions? Sarai had so many questions, but only two that mattered to her personally. And can you do it so a person doesn't know it is happening? Sarai had felt the presence and knew it was from outside herself. Had Bee done that just so she would be aware of what was happening? Any emotion is fair game, yes. And I can be more subtle than that, but as far as being undetectable, I don't think so. Not that I want to mess around with people enough to find out. Bee smirked behind her mask. So no, I have not been secretly manipulating you without your knowledge. Good to know. Sarai nodded and gave a small smile. There was a weight lifted off the young woman's shoulder. The idea that Noble would actively coerce all of those around her was a far-fetched thought, but it was better to know that she couldn't do it repeatedly without someone at least growing suspicious. I'm glad to see you trust me again. Noble dismissed the armor and mask. Her eyes swirled slightly with amusement. How did you? Sarai's mouth hung open. Full disclosure, the passive part of that ability allows me to sense others' moods. The professor winced. Instead of being offended, the redhead laughed. You are full of surprises. Now I have to know, how did Mongrel feel when you were battling him? Strange one, that Mongrel. He had no emotion at all. At least none I could read. Either he was blocking me somehow, or he feels nothing. Noble's face darkened. Both ladies shivered. Sarai shook off her discomfort. Fascinating. I do wonder if you will run into him again in the group competition next time. I'm not doing the team tournament. The professor scoffed. But the article. Sarai waved her communicator. Unorganized laundry was trying to bait me, I think. He works at the library here. And I might have insinuated Queen Bee was considering going up against him. It was just to rile him up a bit. Seems Nick took the rumor to the next level. Noble felt Sarai's mood dampen. What's wrong? It's silly, Sarai shrugged. She turned away and began to gather her things. Thank you for trusting me with your secret. Touching her friend's arm, Noble felt an extra wave of sadness coming off of the beautiful baker. I don't care if it is silly or not, you can tell me. After a moment of hesitation, Sarai let her shoulders droop. I was kind of hoping. That is, if it were true and you were going to join the group competition. Well, now I am the only duelist who knows your secret identity. And you were hoping you might be part of my team. Noble put the pieces of the puzzle together. No wonder she was so excited. Like I said, it was silly. Sarai took a sip of her water and looked away. It's sweet and I would have been honored. Noble rubbed the back of her neck. She could feel her friend's sadness deepen, and it was her fault. I mean, I have never done a group battle outside of the dream realm. It might be good practice fun even to work alongside someone else. In the dream realm, humans needed one another to survive. It was almost impossible to stay alive alone for any real length of time. The Dreamscape did not live by the same rules. Noble had been free to enjoy her anonymity while honing her personal skills. Maybe some group practice was the next logical step. I won't promise that we will enter a competition, but perhaps we can train more often until we have a good feel for one another. Then, maybe, we can try to do a duel as a team. Noble winced at the other woman's squeal. The wave of happiness washed over Noble like a ray of sunshine. "Oh Queen Bee, I mean Noble, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. I have so much to learn, but I hope I can teach you a thing or two as well." Sarai gathered up Noble in a hug so suddenly that the professor bumped into the table, knocking both her bag and drink. Just before hitting the ground, the satchel and bottle floated back up and landed on the table unharmed. Noble embraced her friend and chuckled. "Are you kidding? You teach me something every time I see you." "Like what?" Sarai had no idea she was a source of wisdom. Pulling away, Noble gave a shy smile. "Like I shouldn't make up gossip unless I want it to be published in a news article. I think the credit for that lesson goes to unorganized laundry." Sarai had not been the one to contact the reporter. The baker had just found it while waiting for Noble to arrive. Nickel had been the unknowing teacher. "Fair enough, but you did teach me this. A person with a communicator can be just as dangerous as one with a sword." Noble's body still stung from being pinned to the floor. Information could be just as deadly as the tip of a blade. "You already knew that." Sarai refused to believe her friend was so naive. "Clearly, I had forgotten." Noble pursed her lips. It was never fun to admit one's own shortcomings. Sarai's communicator buzzed. She looked down at it and frowned. "You need to go." Noble knew the look. "There is a problem at the bakery. I at least need to check in and make sure Pillow doesn't get himself in too much trouble. He's a sweet kid and I don't want anything to happen to him. Give Pillow my best wishes." Noble had met the young man a handful of times. He had a propensity for picking up technology quickly, so if he was having a problem, it was likely something big. Sarai nodded and gathered her things. "If you were serious about making a team, I would like to start as soon as possible." "When are you available?" "Tomorrow afternoon. I will ask Instructor Rock to arrange a standing appointment in a room for us." Noble knew the request would be no issue. "Thanks, Noble. You are the best. I think we will make a great team." "You know what, I think so too." The more Noble thought about the idea, the more she was warming to it. "But don't tell anyone until we make it official. I hope I can trust you more than a certain librarian." "Absolutely," Sarai promised. "I will not tell a soul ever. I believe you." While sincerity wasn't exactly an emotion, there was a peace that came with it which Noble could perceive. The professor watched her friend leave and heaved a sigh. One way or another, it seemed she had proved the nonsense-free reporter, Frey and herself correct about one thing. Queen Bee was forming a group. On the train home, Noble scrolled through the news on her communicator to see who else had picked up the news story which Frey had broken. A few other places seemed to have copied an excerpt from the original piece, but mostly things were relatively quiet. Phew, that's a relief. Out of curiosity, the professor decided to check out what else was happening in the world. It appeared one of the darlings of Clan Song had supposedly been seen having a lover's quarrel with an unnamed man from a rival clan. The society pages were always filled with this kind of gossip, but Noble rarely paid attention. A secret tryst here, a date with a movie star there, it was mostly a ploy to keep people distracted from whatever was really going on. Why should she care about who was having a love child with whom? Noble had been to the dream realm and fought the horrors there. Whether it was short skirts or shirts that would be the next big thing did not interest her in the slightest. Noble continued to scroll. Another page talked about some band which her daughter liked, reminding her that she should probably get tickets for their next concert as a surprise. Even though Noble despised loud music, some girl bonding time would do her and Honey a world of good. That was until Noble saw the price for the tickets. "That's insane. Can't I just buy her some ice cream instead?" That cost is a hard pass. As the train lowered from yet another great height into her station, Noble mulled over just how expensive kids were. Surely, her money was better spent on a poster of Nightingale for Honey's bedroom. Probably, I'll have to talk to Fort. Shaking off her thoughts, Noble hurried home just in time to welcome the PTV which Fort had hired to bring her younger children home. Once Noble opened the door, the twins tumbled out of the vehicle in all their 9-year-old enthusiasm. "Hi, Mom, you'll never guess what happened," Brock chirped, throwing his arms around his mother. Noble eagerly hugged him back. "I did a backflip with my eyes closed." "That's most impressive." Noble had many questions, but also probably didn't want to know the answers. Her little daredevil never did manage to keep his feet on the ground. Not unlike his mother. Behind his younger twin, Blaze held up the report he turned in the day before. "Look at this, Mom. My teacher says it is the best she's ever seen." "I have no doubt. It looks like I have two geniuses before me." You must both take after your father. Noble doted on her children. How about we scurry inside and you can tell me all about it? The boys ran ahead as Noble thanked the driver and shut the door. While the PTV pulled away, Noble glanced reflexively down the street to look for her little girl. Of course, Honey was not coming home just yet. Her school would be getting out right around now and she still had combat training to complete. Noble wondered idly if her daughter's training would look anything like her own had today. Hopefully, Honey wouldn't get distracted so easily. One of these days Noble was determined to try to watch her daughter's skills in action. Surely it would help relieve some of the deep fear in the professor if she knew Honey could at least hold her own in her fight. Unless she couldn't, that would bring a whole new wave of fear. Noble shivered. She isn't Seb, and Honey is still just 14. I don't need to worry about the spell for over a year and a half. Scanning the row of houses to find something else to occupy her mind, Noble caught sight of her next-door neighbor. Or so she thought. When she focused, there was no one on the front porch. Very odd. The professor shrugged and headed inside. By the time Honey and Fort came into the house together, the smell of the chicken with potato substitute was reaching its peak. Blaze was clearing his homework from the kitchen while Brock was balancing the dinner plates on his head while bringing them to the waiting table. Noble gave the newcomers a huge smile. "Did your dad walk you home?" she asked with a wink. "Ha ha, very funny." Honey flushed remembering how she had been rude to her mother that morning. "We happened to meet out front. Dinner smells amazing. Your father might be a phenomenal cook, but my mother taught me a thing or two as well." Noble tossed her head dramatically. What she said was true though. Her mother had taught her some recipes from former North American cuisine, and when possible, Noble tried to recreate them with what she could find in the NQSC. This meal was one of those attempts. "What's the special occasion?" Ford walked over and kissed his wife. "Nothing in particular, I just felt like celebrating." Noble felt the happiness drifting off of her husband. He seemed to be in a good mood as well. "How was work?" "Same as ever. Stressful, but my new assistant seems to be settling in well. It has been weeks since I missed a meeting, and everything is finally very organized." Ford acted like this was quite a feat. For the government, perhaps it was. "I am glad things are improving. How about you, dear? Did training go well?" Noble felt another pang of guilt radiate from her daughter. The professor belatedly realized this had been a point of contention earlier that morning. "It was fine," Honey answered. "Better than fine, actually. I really do have the best tutor in the world. Thank you so much for letting me learn from him." Noble decided to let the matter rest. "I am glad things are going well, sweetheart. I hope you are hungry. Food's ready." The last comment brought hoots from the boys as they eagerly took their seats. Noble carried the chicken and potato-like pieces in the big pot over to the table. The chunks of food floated in a golden gravy that was terrible for the arteries but good for the soul. Behind the awakened a pot of green vegetables, a bowl of fruit and a loaf of buttery bread hovered dutifully until they reached the table a moment after their chef. Plates began to fill as the eager diners sought to fill their bellies as quickly as possible. Noble felt particularly famished after her bout with the famed fireshing. The contact with the ground had been unbearably long, and it would take a day or two for the pain to fully leave. The comfort food went a long way to healing her soul. After the initial silence while everyone enjoyed the meal, each got their turn to tell about their day. It was customary to tell one funny, serious or sad thing over dinner, but most of the time funny was what got the best reaction from the rest of the group. It made sense. Everyone liked being entertained. The twins collectively told a story of how during physical education, the teacher accidentally broke a student's nose while pitching a ball. While not exactly a joke, it had all of the wild and whimsy that boyish humor demanded. Blood, screaming, and a trip to the nurse. Fort, who couldn't talk about the bulk of his work due to his security clearance, retold a charming joke that he had heard from one of his colleagues. "Why shouldn't you write with a broken datapad stylus? It's pointless." Honey gave her obligatory groan, as all teens must do when their fathers try to be funny, before relaying some tidbits about her day. The girl didn't often mention friends at school, but she did talk about her history class and what she had learned. Noble was always amazed by what a smart daughter she was raising. Honey was sweet and intelligent, every mother's dream. The fact that Noble had the honor of watching her grow and change was nothing short of awe-inspiring. It was moments like this that the professor truly loved being a parent. Honey paused and blushed under her mother's gaze. "What? Nothing. I was just listening." Noble did not want to embarrass the girl with her doting. "Is it my turn?" The woman smiled as all eyes turned on her. She knew exactly what to tell them. Brock, you know how you said orange is your favorite color? Well, I think I found someone who likes it even better than you, and you'll never guess his name. Sometime later, the table was finally cleared, the homework completed and the twins tucked in with a bedtime story. Ford could feel the days of such moments were close to an end, so he had offered to handle the young men's evening routine. No, you cannot have another glass of water, he said to Blaze as he turned off the light. It will make you need to use the restroom in the middle of the night. Ford shut the door before the boy could argue, and already he heard the quiet chatter of little voices bemoaning their fate. They won't be sleeping any time soon. As Ford returned to the living room, he found Honey and Noble sitting on the synthetic leather couch listening to something on the teen's communicator. The ladies looked over the couch at him as the triumphant hero approached. I don't know how you do it, Ford admitted, with a weary smile. Do the twins always ask so many questions or did they save them up just for me? Noble laughed. Ah yes, I lovingly call that, the gauntlet. And yes, I have to run it every night. They must have gone easy on you. You got out in half the time I thought you would. Wiping imaginary sweat from his brow, Ford plopped dramatically down on the couch right between the two ladies. They barely had time to move out of the way to accommodate the third person. Ford wrapped them both up in a hug with his two great arms. And how are my girls this evening? Honey was playing some music for me that she bought. Noble motioned to the nearly crushed communicator. Ford lifted it from underneath his leg and listened. The tune was both haunting and eerily serene. It gave Ford the feeling of being in another world. I recognize this style, he said excitedly. The government worker seldom had time for pop culture, so he was excited to momentarily feel cool. It's that composer Griffin, isn't it? His music is always iconic. Honey nodded. It's from the movie Song of Light and Darkness. I got the soundtrack. You know I met him once, of course that was before he was famous. Ford was cut off as both females shook their heads. We know, they teased. The man continued undeterred. It was a retirement party for a colleague. Joe, I think his name was. Anyway, Griffin was hired to play background music while the hors d'oeuvres were being served. And wouldn't you know it, he got an idea for a song in between sets. And you know who he asked for a fun song name? Me. I thought he was just trying to make small talk, so I gave him the first thing that came to mind. Imagine my shock when, bored beyond belief, hit the top of the charts a few months later. It was the launching point of his career. Honey nodded politely and stood from the couch. She kissed her father on the cheek. That story gets better every time you tell it, but I think it has finally hit its peak. I will head to bed. I have a test in the morning. After hugging her mother, Honey clutched her communicator and headed to her room. When the coast was clear, Noble gave her husband a knowing look. She straightened the collar of his button-down shirt and asked, "Did you really just bore our daughter into going to bed at a responsible hour?" Ford grinned, pushing back a stray hair from his wife's face. While that was not my intention when I started, I will say that it is a very happy accident indeed. It isn't very often we get to be alone this time of the evening. The man caught his wife's lips in his own. Wrapping her arms around his neck, Noble made herself quite comfortable as Ford massaged the tension from her shoulders. Many moments passed before Ford released her from the kiss. He looked into her eyes, which had turned a deep gray. Perhaps we should turn in early as well. Noble flushed. Of course, he knew she didn't sleep in their bedroom. In fact, the awakened wouldn't need to head to the dream realm at all for at least another couple of days. Which meant Ford could only be insinuating one of two things. She was pretty sure which one it was. The man held her hand and pulled her into their room. Leaving her behind for a second, Ford went to tell the boys to go to sleep one more time before closing the door. He gave a lopsided grin. Now that I have you alone, is there anything you want to tell me? Noble's intuition had been right. While she could feel he had a desire for intimacy, he first wanted to talk about what was on her mind. Don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. Noble could feel his happiness at her words, yet the man still pulled away. All that tells me is there is something bothering you, maybe more than one something, and it is more important than you are letting on. Ford eyed the woman and was satisfied when she did not contradict him. Am I that easy to read? She asked with a pout. Just a little. You relaxed when I kissed you, so when I pulled away, I saw your true colors, or rather the color of your eyes. That sullen gray color you have going on means that a conversation is in order. You are a wise man. Noble averted her gaze. Fort pressed his finger gently under her chin. So, let's talk. I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't have a slight ulterior motive to ensuring that you are happy. He winked, but I do want to know what is happening in that gorgeous head of yours. We can talk. The professor gave a short nod, but first, push the button, please. That's serious, Fort furrowed his brow. You can never be too careful. Noble gave a small smile in return. Fort grunted at hearing the same words which he had brandished when implementing their unconventional security system. Leaving behind his wife, Fort strolled over to the bed and reached for the nightstand. The top drawer made of synthetic mahogany slid silently open, revealing various odds and ends in a rather hefty remote. Deftly, he lifted the remote and pressed 2 of the buttons in quick succession. The first caused the door to hiss slightly as it sealed shut. Thick metal shutters came across the wide window and locked into place. The room became suddenly silent. No hum of the heater on the other side of the wall, no giggling of rowdy boys who were probably wrestling again, not even the sound of the PTV blaring its music as it sped down the sleepy street. This particular spelltech was designed not only to keep sound out but also to keep sound in. Except for Awakened and Above with very powerful aspects to counter it, no one would be able to hear what was going to be spoken between the couple. And that is the way they preferred it. The second button activated another feature completely separate from the security measures. After all the sound of the outside world was removed, a soft hissing sound replaced it as a machine below the bed activated. The 4 posts released a groan before releasing their hold on the floor until they hovered slightly above the ground. Like a mythical flying carpet, the bed floated in place awaiting its weary occupants. The special feature was something Fort had designed as soon as he married Noble. It was the only way to get around her flaw. With nothing touching the ground, the furniture could no longer be considered, well, ground. Which meant, Noble leapt onto the bed and buried herself under the heavily weighted comforter. After a day of not having her seat or feet touch anything, the sensation of the sheets felt absolutely heavenly. And with the special weight of the blanket, she could relax completely without worrying about floating away. Noble patted the spot next to her, her eyes swirling with sudden delight. Okay, I am ready, she said. Let's chat. Fort did not need to be asked twice. He made himself comfortable beside his wife, careful not to be so comfortable that he fell asleep. He did not want to find out what would happen if he started to snore while Noble was baring her heart to him. That would end very poorly indeed. So, Fort said as he inhaled the scent of the woman now leaning on his chest. They had both managed to change into nightclothes before fully settling down. What is on your mind? Depends. Am I talking to Deputy Director Fort, government agent, or my darling husband whom I love? Noble had learned this trick from her mother, Lena. Her father had been a very high-ranking government official both in North America and after they had fled to the NQSC. As a result, Lena had developed the habit of delineating which person she was talking to. After a couple of instances where her private musings about things she discovered ended up in official reports, Noble's mother had decided to make it clear when what she said was not allowed to be shared. In here, I am always your devoted husband and nothing more. Fort raised one hand as if taking an oath. Satisfied by his answer, Noble relaxed against her husband and stared up at the ceiling. All right, 2 things happened today. Which do you want to hear first? Whichever made you tell me to activate the same protocols I do in my office when I have a confidential meeting. Fort quirked an eyebrow at her. So you admit that you have this spelltech in your office then? Noble's interest was piqued. She had only been to his work a handful of times and not at all since Fort's last promotion where his new office had a mysterious upgrade. Don't change the subject. Fort poked her side, causing her to giggle. Can't blame me for trying. The woman's laughter increased as Fort tickled her in earnest. I can blame you for a lot of things, he joked, knowing he never would. Now spill. Fine, fine. Noble wriggled until the attack ceased. She brought her right arm from under the covers and summoned the portcullis key into her lithe hand. The orb formed in her palm and immediately the shadows in the dim room became darker. A strange energy emanated from the lightless ball, causing Fort to shift uncomfortably away from his wife. What in the world is that? He furrowed his brow. A mystery. Noble turned the ball over, examining all the surfaces once again to search for any imperfection. There was nothing noticeable, but the lights were dim, and the ball seemed to be pulling what little illumination there was into it. You summoned a mystery into our house. Ford looked at her in disbelief. I just wanted you to look at it for a moment so you know what I am talking about. It is called the portcullis key. Noble looked apologetically at her husband, and her doe eyes softened his heart. I've seen it now. Thank you. Dismissing the key, Noble allowed the memory to disappear in a rain of gentle sparks. After the darkness of the orb, the tiny glints of light were nearly blinding. Fort shielded his eyes for a moment. That thing gives me the creeps. Where did it even come from? Is it from your last trip to the dream realm? Noble was a little relieved that she was not the only one perturbed by the memory. Her husband's instincts were good. But even creepy memories could be useful. Sometimes exceptionally so. No, I stayed safe in the citadel as I always do. The memory was lent to me by a student to study. As soon as I figure out what it does, I shall return it to her. Noble thought back to what Catfine had said about how the professor might need it, but left out that part of the story. It would only create worry, which was likely unnecessary. And what is so special about this memory that you need to study it so closely? Fort relaxed back onto his pillow. I am not sure, hence the mystery part. Other than the name and one additional word, the runes are completely unreadable. It is like they have been written over. Noble shrugged. Strange runes. Did you ask Julius for help? Fort's mind was already working on the problem. His wife was an expert on memories, but her old teacher was far more skilled in deciphering the strange language of the spell. Noble nodded. She and her husband were very much alike in their trains of thought. Already did. He said he would look at both versions of the runes and get back to me. B2 couldn't give you any information. Fort scratched his head with his free hand. Our dear android spit out a bunch of information, but it was all incomprehensible. I showed it to Julius as well. I think the fact the runes were changed but not fully erased messed with B2's ability to give me the data. Noble did not want to disparage the android assistant in front of Fort. He had gone to a lot of trouble to get it for her, and the robot was normally indispensable to the professor's work. This one failure was an anomaly, not the rule. I see. That is very strange indeed, but not exactly groundbreaking such that you think the government would be interested. Is there something you aren't telling me? Fort felt Noble stiffen in his arms. She relaxed a moment later and sighed. It is more of a feeling. A reaction within me when I hold the memory. There is something strange, different, and powerful about that little bauble. I know it, and those kinds of memories are attractive to both the government and every great clan. If my student does decide to sell the memory, I want to make sure Catfine does not give it away for anything less than it is worth. You are very loyal to the sleepers. It is something I love about you. Fort kissed the top of his wife's head. I hope you are able to solve the problem soon. Though I must admit I am glad you have found a new hobby. What do you mean? Noble lifted her head off Fort's chest and raised one eyebrow. You've been fixated on the gate which opened by our children's school for so long that I was beginning to think you'd never move on. Oh, that. Noble looked away and closed her eyes. She knew exactly what color they were turning. Yes, that obsession wasn't healthy. This is a better use of your time. Fort rubbed his wife's neck gently. Noble pressed her lips together, staying silent long enough that Fort wondered if she had accidentally fallen asleep. She had done that on occasion, and her dutiful husband had had to guide her floating body to the sleeping pod. B, he said softly, using the pet name which had inspired her Dreamscape moniker. Yes, Noble turned her face back towards her husband and forced a smile. You said you had two things to tell me, right? What was the second? Fort hoped the question would lighten the mood. Oh, yeah, I got outed today. Noble shrugged. She enjoyed the confusion on her husband's face. Fort's muscles tensed. When you say outed, sir, I figured out I am Queen Bee. Apparently I used a signature move of hers to avoid Mongrel. If Noble had known that was what would lead to her discovery, she might have tried something else to avoid the demon. Not that there was much time to think during that fight. Noble felt Fort's body convulse as he tried not to chuckle audibly. This is excellent news. As a fellow duelist, surely she of all people can appreciate all your effort. It gets worse. She wants me to join the team competition with her in the next tournament. Fort laughed even harder. If by worse you mean this is even better news, then I happily agree. Maybe this time you will let me buy a ticket to be in the visible audience. I can use the excuse that I am cheering on your friend. I didn't say I was doing it for sure, and no, you may not. How would it look for you to be there watching, Fireshing and Queen Bee, without me? Noble paled. Probably no one would say anything, right? All right, but I will find a reasonable excuse to be there. Maybe I can get my boss to get me a ticket so I can go on a scouting expedition. Fort's mind was already working through the possibilities. I don't know why I haven't tried that before, actually. Probably because Honey is just now old enough to babysit her brothers. Noble did not voice her thoughts. She didn't want to encourage his antics further. Well, I am going to start training with Sarai more regularly just to see how things might go. She will probably come to the academy at least at first, so it shouldn't mess up our daily routine. You should use your dojo. It isn't huge, but it is built well enough to withstand fire attacks. Fort suggested. And if it doesn't? Noble arched her brow. Then we have been talking about renovating anyway, haven't we? Fort winked. You are enjoying this far too much. Noble elbowed the man beside her. I am just happy you finally have someone you can confide in, Fort admitted. Besides me, of course. But really, you two will have more to talk about than ever. You certainly took this news better than I did. Noble wished she had Fort's confidence that it would all be fine. One question. Fort stopped smiling and became quite serious. Noble tilted up her head. Yes, when you win the team tournament, can I finally start selling your merchandise? I have the perfect idea for a dynamic duo t-shirt. Noble imagined her animated face blazoned across someone's chest. No. Fort poked her side gently. No. What about a keychain? People could carry you around in their pocket or purse. That's worse. Fort pondered for a moment and pursed his lips. All right, and hear me out on this one. A figurine of you and Sarai where your heads bobble. Noble took the pillow beside her and bopped the man's face. He shrugged with a mischievous gleam in his eye. That wasn't a no. After a little more banter, Fort resigned himself to not getting his coveted Queen Bee wall poster and went to sleep. Noble climbed out of bed and walked around to the nightstand. She retrieved the remote and deactivated the room's safety protocol. After removing her communicator from the drawer, she silently slipped out of the room. The house was quiet. Either the twins had finally surrendered to the call of sleep or they had at least settled for trying to lull Noble into a false sense of security. The professor decided that she didn't care. Fake or real rest, they were silent and still. That was enough for her. After a cursory glance at the house to see if anything needed tidying, she headed to her dojo for her nightly routine. That is to say, her nightly routine when she didn't have to travel to the dream realm. Awakened did not need the same amount of sleep as mundane humans, so Noble often had extra time on her hands when her family was not awake. While she could go out, there were only so many things a woman could reasonably do in the middle of the night. Since Noble had expressed a desire to hone her fighting skills and get back into shape after having the twins, Fort had invested in a Dreamscape pod. That was how the professor's hobby as a duelist had begun 9 years before. Noble had started off merely watching the fights. She tried to glean as much information as she could from those who succeeded, and failed. She picked apart different styles and methods, analyzing each for their strengths and weaknesses. Her dojo became her training area. Noble's rough methods became more fluid as the repetition made things feel more natural. The enthusiastic Awakened also sought out the help of the battle master at the academy. The instructor before Rock had been most helpful in taking some of her more rudimentary techniques and honing them to be more effective. The teacher had said Noble had a natural talent for learning and absorbing what was taught, but the brunette professor had just assumed it was his usual flattery he gave to help motivate her. And motivate her, it did. After months of training and watching, Noble finally felt ready to venture into the Dreamscape as a competitor. I can do this, Noble told herself. After giving her carefully chosen alias, the professor selected what she believed to be the location with the lowest skill level. Challenger Queen Bee has entered the arena. The world appeared before her. Noble's face paled. Dozens and dozens of battles were going on at the same time around her, each brutal in their own right. Noble quickly began to second-guess her life choices. It was one thing to look above from the stands. It was quite another to be down in the action. The noise, the clangor of weapons on armor, it was too much. Her fear must have been palpable, for those around her turned and looked at her like she was fresh meat. Under the intense pressure of their gaze, Noble had shied away, her eyes swirling with all the emotions accompanying her nerves. Noble had decided today was not her day. She was not ready. She should leave. But the professor was not quick enough. She was spotted. You there, Queen Bee, is it? A scrawny Awakened with a club across his shoulders had called out. Noble nodded, unsure how her voice would sound through her new, fraudulent facade. Please don't recognize me. What would her students think if she were spotted dueling in the Dreamscape? The woman didn't want to think about it. You're new. His eyes were full of the glint of an easy win. He grinned malevolently. How about a duel? Noble took a step back, ready to exit the dreamscape as suddenly as she had appeared. This was a horrid mistake. Lone Wolf has challenged Queen Bee, a voice boomed, startling the newest duelist in the dreamscape. The area cleared almost immediately to make room for the battle, however short it would be. I hope you don't mind, Lone Wolf smirked. Gotta pad that win count of mine, after all. You'll understand soon enough. Before Noble could react or respond, the club came in an arc directly at her head. Lone Wolf might have been a bit sleazy when it came to a fair fight, but he at least didn't seem to want to draw things out to humiliate her. The duel would be over quickly. Noble leapt sideways, her feet pressing momentarily against the stone ground. A shock ran up her legs, causing her to cry out just as the large club bit into the marble. The force of the hit sent a spider web of cracks along the floor of the arena. Noble looked up at her opponent. He seemed frustrated that his hit hadn't landed. He's scrawny, but that memory packs a punch. Wonder what tier it is. The professor's fascination with Lone Wolf's weapon distracted her from her fear. The second time the club came crashing towards her, Noble was able to wait until the last moment before sliding out of the way. It was another very close call. You're like a bug who doesn't want to be squashed, Lone Wolf grumbled. He spun the club in the air above his head as he eyed his prey. Timid little mice like you have no place here, even if they are awakened. I'll make it painless if you just hold still. Enough was enough. Although Lone Wolf could not see her mouth, it was now set in a determined line. Noble could handle being humiliated in the fight against someone with superior skill, but she would not be cowed just because this man wanted to bully her. If Lone Wolf was going to win, she would make it as hard for him as possible. Come at me, you jerk. The woman managed another duck and glided away from a crash that split the ground. Noble could feel Lone Wolf's intense satisfaction peak just before he struck. It had unknowingly telegraphed his next move to her. Another spike in his emotions led her to easily dodge a blow to the head. From outside, it looked like the mysterious stranger had read her opponent's mind. Really, Noble was testing a newly formed theory. Lone Wolf was putting forth very little effort in his swings. It meant that the memory was doing the bulk of the work for him. As I thought, a very cool memory, but I have a few of those myself. Straightening her back, Noble's eyes began to swirl ferociously. In her hand, a thin rain of sparks spread outward to reveal the unlikely end. The slender estoc was not the most powerful weapon that Noble possessed, but its lightweight and maneuverability made it ideal for Noble's slim frame. It fit comfortably in her hands, and the tip of the sword, when infused with essence, could pierce armor that otherwise seemed impenetrable. The little beauty also had a small secret, but Noble hoped she did not need to use it just now. Before the sword was fully formed, the scrawny man took another swing at his opponent. But rather than back away, Noble stepped into the swing. Although the club packed a powerful punch, the awakened behind it had only minimal strength. So by coming close to Lone Wolf, she missed the bulk of the hit against her body. That was not to say it didn't hurt. Sharp pain radiated through Noble's torso, but she somehow bent her knees enough not to let her feet touch the ground after the devastating blow. Lone Wolf was not so lucky. His hands crashed against Noble's armored shoulder. The surly man cursed as he backed up from the altercation. Two of his fingers had been smashed between the metal plates of Noble's greaves and the might of his club. They were pulpy and useless now, causing the man to have to switch his grip to a single hand. But he never got a chance to try out his new hold. The two separated right as the unlikely end solidified. Lone Wolf stared at her and scoffed. Queen Bee, more like newbie. A spark traveled across the professor's eyes. Noble released the estoc in his direction. Immediately, she could feel Lone Wolf's overconfidence at the fact she had just lost her primary weapon. By all accounts, it was a foolish move. It would take time for Noble to summon a new memory to defend herself. But the professor didn't need to summon a new weapon. Got you. The sword sped up suddenly past the surly man's guard. A moment later, blood was pouring out onto the pristine marble at their feet. Lone Wolf's eyes widened in shock. It was all so sudden that the awakened had not even felt the thin blade pierce his chest. Yet there it was, sticking out like a needle in a pincushion. How did you? The voice of the dreamscape thundered as Wolf disappeared like a destroyed memory. Queen Bee has won. Noble's eyes dimmed their glow as she finished guiding the sword. I am not a timid mouse nor some helpless newbie. I'm Queen Bee, and don't you forget it. The woman paused and took in the results. Had she heard right? Yes, she had won. That wasn't so bad. I think I will try just one more, Noble thought, just so I can get a better feel for things. Then I'll call it a night. Yes, one more should do the trick. Noble fought 20 battles that night. She won them all. That night, the legend of Queen Bee was born. A night of victories turned into a week of victories. And then a month. Then 2 months. Then 4. Pretty soon, the amateur league was no longer a welcoming place for Queen Bee. It seemed few wanted to fight someone who had never lost a battle. Fortunately, by then, the determined professor had gained enough confidence to consider taking the next step, the professional leagues. It was not an easy choice, and it took even more research and observation before her foray into the big leagues could begin. Late one night, she made her quiet entry into an arena that resembled an ancient theater in the round. Velvet curtains hung overhead in a dramatic display while theatrical torches lined the edges of the stands to give the combatants light to see. Bee appeared in the middle of a wooden stage full of nervous energy. Challenger Queen Bee has entered the theater. Queen, someone whispered. Did they just say Queen Bee? Is she what all the buzz is about? Another asked, eyeing her carefully. Guess she finally decided to make the leap, a third shrugged. The words were all quietly said, but it seemed in the setting of the theater, each of them was amplified as if they had been spoken right into her ear. Buzz. Bee furrowed her brow. Why in the world have all these people heard of me? It seemed at least some of the professionals kept tabs on the up-and-coming amateurs. And why shouldn't they? All of them had been amateurs as well. It was good to be aware of possible competition. Bee shifted in her armor, trying very hard not to look at her shoes. Her name may have had Queen in it, but just now she felt like a peasant. Just like her first duel, there was a small part of the awakened that told her she did not deserve to be there. Thankfully her pride was stronger than her urge to flee. Not wanting to embarrass herself by making the wrong first selection, Bee looked around for someone she recognized from her observations. Like a good student, she had made notes on who she could reasonably have a chance against and who was likely out of her ability at present. Unfortunately, none of the awakened on her list were present, putting Bee in a quandary. Should she stick around and try her luck or leave and come back at a better time? Gritting her teeth, Bee decided to stay. I don't want to make a fool of myself by making a foolish selection. I'll just wait and see if someone challenges me. It took some time, just as Bee was sizing others up, so too were they trying to decide if they wanted to try their luck with an unknown. Her blaring record of 0 losses was unheard of. Each wanted to be the one to deal the blow, but few were willing to risk being the first professional to lose to the newcomer. After Bee watched a match or two from the edge of the stage, a lone figure approached. He was just shy of 2 meters tall with red auburn hair and a slightly bushy beard. He wore a winsome smile and a mantle of silver fur across his bare shoulders. Knotted on his chest, Bee could see a slightly too realistic tattoo of a Celtic dragon. But that was not what caught Bee's attention. This man had a seafoam green bandana tied across his eyes. The duelist was blind. Excuse me, my lady. Would you be Queen Bee? The man asked cordially. Bee froze. She had not yet spoken in the Dreamscape, and she did not want to break that streak just now. But the duelist could not see her nod. Fortunately, he continued as if she had answered. It seems we have not given you a proper welcome. I prefer not to duel a lady unless she starts the match, but I feel we have left you without a dance partner. Seems most unfair. The man flashed another smile. Bee could not tell at first if he was trying to lull her into a false sense of security. Was he really just that polite? He at least seemed friendlier than the others. His emotions were calm as he spoke, not spiking like someone trying to deceive. She sensed no malice from him. Bee was here to battle, not make friends, but the two were not mutually exclusive. She decided to make a judgment after the duel was complete. The woman would not let down her guard. Placing his hand across his bare chest, the man gave a small bow. Bane has challenged Queen Bee. The stage suddenly felt much larger as those around cleared the designated ring. Bee's heart raced. If Bane couldn't see, this should be an easy victory. Bane was a professional duelist. He had won many victories to find his way onto this stage. He could not be underestimated. With a rain of sparks, the unlikely end appeared in Bee's hand. She raised it defensively, her eyes swirling in a mix of greenish-gray. Bane summoned no weapon. He simply raised his fists as 2 pieces of wrapped cloth materialized around his wrists and palms. Shall we dance? He asked amiably. Bee quickly discovered that Bane was not kidding. After attempting her first strike, Bee was astonished by the grace and agility of her opponent as he inexplicably moved out of the way. Of course Bee's movements were flawlessly fluid, she was secretly hovering less than a centimeter from the ground. But Bane was not, yet somehow his large frame defied physics, as if he was using the wind itself to guide his movements. Eyes are not the only way to see, Queen Bee. And some have better sight without them. Bane gave a lopsided grin but did not attack. Bee widened her stance and prepared to attack again. Something felt wrong about striking at the blind awakened, but this was a duel. Surely he knew that. However, he only made defensive maneuvers. A quick series of swings from the estoc were met with blocks by Bane's hands. The wrist guards on his palms were exceedingly durable. While the point of her sword might have been able to pierce them, he was quick to catch the edge and deflect it to the side. Why isn't he attacking? Is he toying with me? Bee was growing increasingly frustrated. Bane, on the other hand, seemed unbothered by her assault. To him, this was just a sparring match. Queen Bee wanted him to do something. Anything. If this kept up, she would become worn out, and Bane would swoop in and take an easy victory. That's exactly what he is doing. Preying on my frustration to wear me out. I've been a fool. Disengaging, Bee swished her sword out to her side. The blade caught one of the spotlights, flashing brilliantly. Tilting her chin up, she faced her opponent with an obstinate scowl. She would not waste any more of her energy on an opponent who made no effort to engage. I see you have changed your tune. Good. I liked you from the moment I saw you. Such a pure soul is rare. The man clicked his tongue. Now, don't get discouraged. You've clearly got the power, but you need to work on your pace. Conserve your energy and move with purpose. Bane lifted one finger like a teacher scolding a pupil. Queen Bee cringed. Do I sound like that sometimes? The new arrival decided not to fight the advice of the more seasoned veteran. Obviously, Bane could see something that she could not. Taking a deep breath, Bee slowed her pace. It indeed felt more natural and allowed her time to circulate her essence more efficiently. Whereas before Bee felt nervous, the fluttering awakened finally began to feel in control of her body. Her haphazard movements ceased. Her actions became instinctive, much closer to how she had handled herself in the amateur rings. Relinquishing control to her muscle memory meant that Bee could focus on more important things, like anticipating her opponent's next move. The battle suddenly shifted as the tension in the ring took on a new form. Another melody. This one is your best yet. Do not go easy on me, dearest queen. He began to hum lightly, but it did not faze Bee. On the contrary, it only added to her determination and drive. It was like he had heard a song inside her soul and was urging it forward. Is that his aspect? It didn't matter. With renewed energy, Bee whizzed her estoc through the air and pointed at Bane. He smiled amiably and lifted his fists. The fun began. Bane was strong and spirited, but Bee was swift and even more agile. The slash of the sword and each strike of the fist made for a mesmerizing display. It was nothing short of stunning. One of Unlikely End's silent stings made it past Bane's guard, drawing a thin line of blood from his bicep. He began to sing louder, but Bee only narrowed her eyes, continuing to focus. Bane blocked a dozen more of her careful advances before a second dastardly slice made a gash in his thigh. That's a potent little weapon you have there. Bane gave a pale smile as he wiped the blood from his leg. The sharp tip of the estoc had done extensive damage. If he had been a mundane human in the real world, the cut would have severed the muscle completely, making a person unable to walk. Somehow Bane remained upright. Bee felt Bane's emotions waver. There was a spike that she recognized after months of battles to mean only one thing. He was about to strike. Bane's song suddenly stopped. He lunged forward, his fists full of power that would crush his dainty opponent into a paste. But Bee shifted. Hovering slightly to her left, Queen Bee slid to the side without moving her feet to indicate a step. It was not enough for anyone watching to notice, but perfect for Bane's strike to come down centimeters off from its intended target. In just the right spot for the unlikely end to plunge into the man's stomach. The stage rumbled as the blind awakened's fist crashed into the wooden structure. Bane gasped, then smiled as blood began to pool in his mouth. Now you are beginning to see what I mean, he said, his teeth stained with red. Best of luck, Ms. B. Never forget your song. Like that, Bane disappeared in a rain of sparks. Queen Bee has won. Bee turned around. Behind her, the stage was already repairing itself from the duel. Bane's fist had decimated the ring so completely that the illusion of the dream was broken for a moment, revealing a black void of stars below. The queen shivered. Did he miss, on purpose? Why? Bee had many questions, but she had a feeling that the answers would only bring more confusion. In the end it did not matter, the result was the same. The floating monarch was now, officially, a professional duelist. In all her years in the Dreamscape, the battle with Bane was the only one Noble felt she had no right to have won. The power difference between them had been far too great. But instead of destroying her, the mysterious duelist had gifted her with a few valuable lessons and a continued unblemished record. A record which had stood until last night. After their duel, the professor had seen Bane in the Dreamscape a few more times. He had offered her a chance to join his clan, but she had silently declined. By the time Bee felt competent enough to challenge Bane for a rematch, the blind powerhouse had already left the Dreamscape to ascend. Noble only knew that last bit because he and his wife had come to visit her at the academy a few years later on unrelated business. Other than a strange pun about a joke of hers being a stinger, Bane had given no indication of being aware of the professor's alter ego, and shortly after the meeting, Bane had dropped off of the grid entirely. I wonder what he is up to these days, Noble mused idly. Some mysteries would have to remain unsolved. I do hope he is well. The walk down memory lane had seemed much longer than the walk through the house to get to Noble's dojo. Time was a funny thing where the mind was concerned. Years of thought could be packed into a moment and a single, deep contemplation could take years. Enough daydreaming. Time for some dreamscaping. Noble shut and locked the door to her dojo before facing the simulator. Since she wouldn't be able to lay down in the enclosure anyway, both this pod and her regular one were specially modified for Noble to float up against the roof without injury to the pod or her body. After a moment of preparation, the professor climbed into the simulator's cradle and summoned both her armor and the fraudulent facade. Noble was unsure how soon or how much the saint who helped run the Dreamscape could perceive, and she didn't want to be caught with the mysterious Thane suddenly knowing her identity. Can't be too careful. Ready? Noble allowed the lid to close around her. Enter Dreamscape. Yes. The professor focused on the appropriate answer. Noble's vision darkened as she found herself in a void of endless stars. Welcome, Queen Bee. The voice seemed almost relieved to see her. Noble shook her head. It sounds the same as it always does. Please, choose the dream of your liking. Scrolling past the amateur dreams, Noble selected a spot that looked appealing. Should have a good group this time of night. Let's do this. The void disappeared and was replaced with a mountaintop. A circular set of seats was carved around the peak which was sunken in to make an uneven, permeable surface. Once an ancient volcano, the lava had long cooled and solidified, leaving the porous pumice behind for the duelists to use as their stomping ground. To add to the drama, the air here was warm and smelled slightly of brimstone, as if the mountain might vomit molten rock at any time. Challenger Queen Bee has entered the mountain top. Noble took a deep breath and raised her chin. Her usually soft shoulders pushed back as she stood tall. With the help of her trusted mask, the woman's entire demeanor changed. A myriad of colors swirled in her eyes as they glowed with dangerous excitement. After this startling transformation, the awakened could no longer reasonably be called Noble. She was Queen Bee. Nowadays her appearance usually drew all the attention from the entire arena. But just now the announcement of her arrival was overpowered by the noises of the crowd. Something was already ongoing. Bee didn't mind. She didn't crave the fame. On the rare occasion she was able to enter unnoticed, she took full advantage of the opportunity. The queen edged her way toward one of the stone walls which protected the spectators from the gruesome battles. Up in the gallery, people were booing and cheering in equal measure. Whatever was happening had the crowd split on the response. There are a lot more real spectators than usual. Bee looked around curiously. Normally, the Dreamscape generated a false audience with a few semblances of actual people interspersed. It helped the duelists be more motivated to battle. But just now there were almost as many real people, if not more, than those who were pretend. Among those in the stands, Bee spotted the intrepid, nonsense-free journalist, Frey. The man was watching intently, careful not to miss a single detail of what was happening below. Up until that point, it was possible that these were some leftover excited fans from the tournament the day before. The presence of the press changed things. If he is here, something must really be going on. Back in the arena where hundreds of battles should have been going on, only a handful actually were at that moment. Most had either finished, paused, or not started due to one very polarizing figure. With his own battle freshly ended, a tall, bald man clad in a camel skin vest was blowing kisses and waving at the crowd. One eye was covered by a dashing eye patch while the other winked at any beauty that caught his eye. B leaned away from the wall and strained to hear what the pirate look-alike was saying. "Thank you, ladies. You are too kind. Oh, come now, I cannot help that your girlfriend likes me better than you." The man flashed a charismatic smile before rubbing his hand across his bald head. The dome was so shiny that B found it almost blinding. Someone in the crowd shouted back at the awakened duelist. "Oh, you want to fight me? Come out of the stands and show me what you've got." B's mouth dropped open. She had never seen someone openly taunt the audience like that. Of course, most arenas did not allow such closeness between the battlefield and the spectators. If the camel man really wanted to battle the audience member, he would have to go to a location where they could both fight. This was an elitist dream. Only the top fighters were allowed to enter. The thread was an empty one and everyone knew it. The member of the crowd stood angrily and disappeared from the stands. Challenger Ina has entered the mountain top. Ina has challenged Lamak. The voice of the Dreamscape nearly overlapped itself with the two announcements. The man from the crowd who B now knew as Ina was suddenly in the arena and covered in alloy armor from the neck down. Lamak turned around just in time to see his fate. Without a word, Ina balled his knuckles. Instantly his hand grew to the size of a small house. Pulling the gargantuan fist back, Ina bashed Lamak into the wall, pulverizing the perpetrator into a fine mist. With one punch, the plucky pirate was no more. Sparks rained down as the crowd erupted into cheers. "Ina has won. Pirate puncher. Pirate puncher." As Ina's hand returned to its normal size, he bowed to the crowd with a flourish. Then he disappeared from the field of play and resumed his place in the crowd. B was speechless. The person standing beside her was not. "Get that man a stream if he doesn't have one. I would watch it any day of the week." The queen turned her head. She hadn't even seen one of the most famous duelists appear next to her. But she knew his face immediately. "Leo Stryker." "Seriously?" Leo continued in a hushed tone where only B could hear. "If that wasn't a massive publicity stunt, then it should have been. My viewers will not be able to get enough. That Lamak and Ina are gold. Think I could get an exclusive?" B gave the other awakened a silent stare. I know, probably not, but you cannot blame me for wanting to try," Leo continued, unbothered by the woman's silence. "It's good to see you, B. I was a little worried after yesterday that you might take a break. I am glad to see you back in the ring. Fought anyone yet tonight?" With a shake of her head, B indicated that she had not. "So I would be your first Dreamscape battle since Mongrel then?" Stryker shifted his stance, leaning forward with great interest. B pointed to her eyes. She knew the man had his video running almost all the time. "I have it running an ad from my sponsor right now, don't worry. I won't show the battle off to my viewers if you don't want me to." Leo bowed his head slightly. He really was a nice guy. The queen knew he would be true to his word. B would be lying if she said that she wasn't a little hesitant to get back in the ring. After her loss with Mongrel and the painful spar with Fireshing earlier that day, her confidence was shaken. But the best way to overcome her fear was to get back out there. Really, if she lost again, it wasn't like it would break her already broken streak. Even if she had 2 losses on her stats, B was still far ahead of anyone else in the rankings. The loss would be a drop in the bucket. And while Leo was out to win, he wasn't out for blood. It would be a friendly match, which was just what Queen Bee needed just now. Shrugging, B spun her finger around her temple lazily, letting Leo Stryker know he was good to let it roll and record whatever he saw fit. It didn't make much difference. There were cameras rolling around the dreams all the time, and the press was already present. B had nothing to gain by making Leo refrain from showing his viewers what they loved to see. "You're the best." Leo cleared his throat as he prepared to resume his feed. "Okay, Strike Force. I have a special treat for you. Queen Bee is here with me. What do you think? Should we see who can sting first?" The charismatic duelist got a landslide of affirmative responses as he feigned reluctance. "All right," you roared, "and I am listening." Leo winked at Queen Bee. "Let the game begin." The voice of the Dreamscape boomed. "Leo Stryker has challenged Queen Bee." The other challengers cleared the area quickly. While uncommon, a non-combatant could be injured or worse even though they were not part of the duel. Bee's eyes narrowed. Leo's movements were familiar to her. It had been a couple of months since they had last battled, but he favored his own style very highly. Likewise, her work with her S-Stock was probably familiar to Stryker's viewers. If Leo wanted some entertainment, perhaps she should oblige and shake things up. There was only one other weapon that she felt comfortable using in the dreamscape. It was one she had earned in her first nightmare but never used in the waking world. He wants a show. I'll give him a show. Mischief flickered across the swirling colors in Bee's eyes. In her outstretched hand, sparks flickered and manifested into a long bronze staff. As she sensed Leo's shock, a smirk formed behind her fraudulent facade. A new weapon. You really are pulling out all the stops today. Leo's amazement turned to excitement. Sensing his enthusiastic reaction, Bee knew she had made the right choice. It was time to have some fun. Less than a moment later, Leo produced a long sword the same color as his azure armor. He was ready. Bee knew that she should feel nervous. The tone of this battle would likely set the scene for the next stage of her time in the dreamscape. And it was a bold move to pull out a weapon which she had not used in years for a duel against a seasoned veteran. Leo might not be Mongrel, but he was still formidable when in his element. Control the pace. Conserve your energy and move with purpose. Bee ran Bane's words over in her mind as she usually did. Amid the constant storm of the emotions around her, those words were her grounding. The two began to circle each other. Leo smiled, clearly enjoying the game of cat and mouse. More than anything, he loved a good surprise, and what was more shocking than the queen not using her signature stinger? His azure blade flashed through the air as he dashed forward with blinding speed. Bee moved aside and struck him on his back with the quarterstaff as he flew past. The hit roared like thunder across the mountaintop. While a strike like that would have paralyzed or even killed a mundane human, Stryker merely fell to one knee. He chuckled and rolled his shoulders as he spun back to face his opponent. Bee stood impassively as she waited for him to rise to his feet. She saw no reason to hit the man when he was down. I see you've decided to speak softly and carry a big stick. Minus the speaking par, Leo's last word was fragmented as he tried to throw the woman off guard. He wheeled around and came at Bee from the side, his azure blade slicing through the air toward her slender neck. Bee shifted her weight and shoved the staff of sages between herself and the blade. Leo's sword clashed against the bronze, sending sparks through the air. The deadly blade was cast aside. Stryker leapt backward as Bee jabbed him with the end of her staff. It was a glancing blow. Rather than wait for the placid queen to sting again, Leo dashed forward. Nice. Bee couldn't help but admire his tenacity. It was part of what made him such a popular combatant. Blocking each of his advances, Bee got in a subtle punch with her quarterstaff on every pass. It was not enough to debilitate her opponent, but it was certainly more than enough to let Leo know that she could read his every move. The other duelist pressed his lips together in concentration. The jovial nature that had been bubbling in him was becoming more serious by the moment. Bee sensed his shift in mood and widened her stance. Things are about to get interesting. Sure enough, Leo spun his blade over his head in a spectacular display. While it wasn't the most functional move, the fact that Bee had no sharp edge to her weapon likely gave the other man some confidence to take the chance. When the azure weapon came out of its circular arc, Leo's entire cadence changed. His fluid motions became staccato. The strikes came at uneven intervals, each more deadly than the last. Like a good dance partner, Bee matched his every move. It was strange and refreshing to see Stryker foregoing his usual style. It seemed Bee's branching out had inspired the talented duelist to do the same. Leo gave a charming smile. Bee knew that look. It's time. His blade sang through the air at blinding speed, crashing into Bee's staff with enough force for the queen to have to float a few steps backward. The staff gave, breaking precisely where the azure sword bit into the bronze. The crowd gasped. Would the broken weapon disappear back into Bee's soul sea, or would she continue to fight with it in two separate pieces? Neither. Bee smirked. Got you. Between the severed pieces of the rod, a set of bronze links formed to connect them once more. On the opposite side of the staff of sages, a second tether released an equivalent section. What had once been one pristine shaft was now three intricate rods connected by two adamantine chains. The segmented staff twisted on itself, catching the blade up in the process. Leo barely managed to disengage without losing his sword. He stepped back to evaluate the change. This time, Bee did not give him the respite he desired. She grabbed the center segment firmly and, holding it still, began to spin the ends of the staff. They blurred like hummingbirds' wings around her, causing a low hum to fill the air. Stryker tried to make his move before Bee had gained her momentum. His blade hit directly beside Bee's left hand, nearly chopping her pinky. Bee's eyes flashed. Twisting her staff and her body to one side, the queen swung one spinning end into her opponent. The tip of the baton cracked Leo on the cheek. His head tipped backward, giving the chain enough room to continue its serpentine journey around the hilt of his blade. When the baton snapped against Leo's hands, Bee pulled with all her might. Stryker grunted, his palms involuntarily releasing his weapon to the woman's persuasion. The azure blade came sailing at Bee like an arrow. She ducked. Not so fast. Before the sword could fully pass over the awakened's right shoulder, she reached up and caught the handle in her hand. Reversing the direction of the blade, Queen plunged the sword into Leo's heart. His face paled, but his smile was as genuine as ever. Stryker's opponent had given him exactly what he wanted, peak entertainment. As he disappeared in a rain of sparks, Queen Bee could have sworn she heard him laughing. The next morning, Fry's article said it all. The Bee is back. That night of victories along with the following couple of weeks proved two things. Bee was not losing her edge, and Mongrel was really just that formidable. But as the Dreamscape was just a hobby, other things often took precedence over her constant annihilation of opposing duelists. Today was no exception. The professor sat in a chair staring with a sullen expression. Today was going to be especially difficult, and Noble was determined to remain as busy as possible. Unfortunately, she had found herself drowning in her morbid thoughts. It took some time to pull herself out of her morose mood and onto the upcoming task. She checked on the state of her soul and sighed. I do hope he will actually have some insight. It would be a shame to waste both our time. Time? What time is it? Oh. Noble's head snapped to the door. I'm going to be late. The awakened emerged from the large, stone building. Having left behind the musty darkness of her dwelling, Noble squinted to push back the overwhelming light. The sun had just peeked over the horizon, looking both just like and completely different from the bright, shining orb that kept Noble company during her waking hours. That's because it wasn't the same sun. Due to her job and family, Noble spent as little time in the dream realm as she could. As soon as her personal timer expired, she would hurry home to those she loved. Today was a rare exception. She had business to attend to. That is why she saw morning dawn over Ender's Deep. Breathtaking. Noble blinked a few times as she took it in. Time to get going. Ender's Deep was one of the few citadels solely maintained by the government. Though most governmental power lay in the waking world, they still held a solid presence in the dream realm as well. While it was not nearly as formidable as the legacy clans, its existence was just as necessary if not more so. Acting as the connective tissue for humanity, the government strategically placed emissaries and agents in every citadel which had been conquered. Most awakened who served the government by day also had assignments at night in places like Bastion or Ravenheart. They kept the government apprised of any and all activities as well as aided communication between entities that might not otherwise speak. Noble could have been stationed at any of those places if she had so desired. No thanks. Her eyes swirled momentarily. She quickened her pace, trying to outrun the thought as well as the ones that accompanied it. In contrast to her inner turmoil, the fresh morning air brushed against Noble's skin. The rays of the sun gently warmed her face. The floating awakened forcibly slowed herself down. What was the use of scheduling an unofficial early morning meeting if she ran and attracted unwanted attention? I'll just have to be late. He'll understand, maybe. At least our dear saint isn't here just now. I would be spotted in barely a moment and delayed even further. Ender's Deep was nominally run by one of the governmental saints, but the stronghold rarely saw their patron. So it was the everyday awakened like the ones about to start their day who kept things going. Like the other fortresses and cities manned by the government, Ender's Deep functioned mostly as an outpost as well as a waystation for those who traveled in the wilds of the dream realm. Noble looked out over the forbidding landscape and imagined what an excursion like that would entail. She shivered. Why anyone would want to travel overland in the dream realm is beyond me. She turned away, continuing her seemingly aimless plod. Her mind also began to wander. Passing one of the largest buildings, Noble ran her fingers along ancient drawings carved into the walls. The images showed markets and trade, but no sign of a king or queen who had reigned over the people living here. Noble frowned slightly. Perhaps the city did not need a ruler. The place has its own natural protection. Being a large distance from both the major strongholds of Clan Song and Clan Valor, the topography of Ender's Deep was neither part of the once ancient forest nor was it stationed in the mysterious hills laced with lava. From the surface, she could barely make out the beginning of the mountains that the Song clan claimed. But Ender's Deep was its own place. In fact, calling it deep was a bit misleading. Although it had likely once been hidden in the bowels of the earth, some cataclysmic event long ago had obliterated one half of the city and caused a profound wound in the landscape. The people left behind, rather than abandoning their home, had dug even deeper into the sheer rock and became cliff dwellers. The series of ladders and varied elevations reminded Noble of a particular group of ancient natives in North America which she had learned about as a child in school. How long ago had the people of the Dream Realm similarly disappeared? The pensive professor ambled along the edge of the street, heedless of the time slipping away. This particular walkway was also the brink of one of the many leveled terraces. She peered down into the abyss. Now that's deep. There was certainly a floor to the canyon down there somewhere, but the creatures who dwelt in the depths were not ones that a regular awakened would ever want to meet. Most of the people who claimed Ender's Deep as their second home avoided wandering along the brink of the darkness. It was good to have a healthy respect for heights. But Noble had no such qualms. She didn't have to worry about falling off the edge because she wasn't really standing on it to begin with. This outpost was the perfect place for someone with the professor's aspect. Fort had somewhat selfishly recommended Ender's Deep as the ideal citadel for her when she awakened. It was out of the direct influence of the major clans and was, as far as the Dream Realm was concerned, relatively secluded and safe. Thanks to her family's government clout, there had been no argument from any of the officials involved. Now, Noble couldn't really dream of being anywhere else. Dreaming? If only I could actually dream again. The woman's face twisted into a wry smile at the thought. The only way for that to happen was for her to become a master. Yeah, that's never going to happen. Going into the first nightmare had been horrific, but Noble had had no choice in the matter. To willingly go into another one, that was unthinkable. So the dreams of old would have to remain merely memories. Speaking of memories, Noble reached the end of the walkway and scaled a ladder. 2 feet awaited her on the next landing. One of them was tapping. A stately emissary in a gray coat and slender shoulder pads looked down on the woman with a grim expression. His light brown skin and curly hair stood in stark contrast to his piercing eyes. "You're late." "Am I?" Noble raised one eyebrow. "Yes." The other awakened inclined his head. "I would have thought you would have seen that coming and adjusted your arrival time accordingly." The corners of the professor's mouth turned up slightly, but her companion simply clicked his tongue. "That is not how my aspect works." With a sweeping motion, he reached down with his gloved hands and helped the woman onto the landing. The professor accepted his assistance and dipped her head in thanks. "You mean all diviners have unique ways in which they discern information?" she asked a little too innocently. Actually, the man held up his index finger to begin an explanation of his particular aspect and how he needed to actually be in physical contact with the person or thing to glean any real information when he realized that he had explained this to her in the waking world only a few days before. He gave her a sidelong glance. "Yes, that is exactly what I mean." "It is nice to see you, Emmer." Noble smiled at him. She actually wasn't sure if Emmer was his actual name or a shortening of his title. Either way, it was what the emissary preferred to be called, and that was enough for the professor. "Is it now?" It was Emmer's turn to raise one eyebrow. "What is nice to see? My unbreakable human spirit fighting against the cruelty of the universe? Or my stoic wisdom which stands like a mountain which will never tumble?" Noble flushed. She had not intended for her words to be taken so literally. "Both, I suppose," she answered at last. Emmer took the answer at face value. "Wise. Now, you wanted to see me." "I did." Noble shifted nervously, checking the rest of the walkway for anyone who might overhear. Taking the cue, Emmer motioned toward one of the deep tunnels carved into the rock. "Would you care for some tea? I was able to have some transported from the waking world." The professor nodded politely. "That would be lovely." Noble followed after the diviner into the passageway which served as a main hall to many offshooting rooms. It had likely been dreary and dank before the earth was ripped open, but now it had a pleasant breeze running through it to some other exit at another point along the wall. Emmer brought her to the 5th door on the left and pushed it open. A low whistle could be heard inside. As she entered, Noble noted a kettle hanging over a fire. "I thought you were kidding about the tea." Emmer wrinkled his nose. "I never joke about tea. Coffee maybe, but not tea." "Noted." Noble accepted a steaming cup which he handed to her. She set it on a small table in front of her to let it cool. Taking a mug for himself, Emmer ignored the heat and drank deeply before leveling his gaze at his guest. "You wanted to see me," he reminded her. "He does get to the point." Noble blew at her drink. "I did. It's about a memory." Emmer pursed his lips, Correct me if I am wrong, but aren't you an expert on memories? The professor took a deep breath. She had anticipated the question. You are not wrong. I rarely am, he shrugged. Which is why I have come for your help. Will you help me? Noble looked down at her cup awaiting his answer. He did not have to assist her. In fact, he really had nothing to gain by doing so. I'll pay you, she added as an afterthought, hoping that would sway him. Emmer waved his hand. Your money does not interest me. I can. Noble was silenced as the man held up one finger. Your money does not interest me, he repeated, a hint of a smile blooming on his face, but your desperation does. Summon the memory. A moment later, a rain of sparks filled the room. A tenebrous ball manifested in Noble's hand. Emmer pursed his lips. How very unimpressive. Is this really what you came about, or are you testing me? I would never test you. Your time is valuable. Noble was too eager to feel irritated by the diviner. She would suffer a myriad of slights if he could give her even a little clue about the portcullis key. Of course, Julius had given her the translation of the runes the day after they had met. He would never let his former pupil down by forgetting to do what he promised. But the mangled runes had not given her the wealth of information she had hoped. The original text had been rather typical of the spell, giving information but very little context. To gain access to the truth, the demon of dread never needed an entrance. Noble's eyes opened wide when she first saw it. The mention of demons was always notable, and it proved her suspicion that the memory was something truly incredible. It also confirmed the professor's need for secrecy and discretion as she continued to gather information. That is why she had come to see Emmer in an unofficial capacity. But as interesting as the original runes were, Noble could not help but be drawn to what was written over them. Only the foolish allow themselves to be denied entrance. The second set of runes, words had made Noble's head spin. She had so many questions. Who had the mysterious sorcerer been that had made the change? Had they been called foolish and sought revenge? Had they been denied entrance to a place and altered their memory just to prove their own worth? Noble mulled over these queries and more countless times before setting up the meeting with the diviner. Emmer was one of her last hopes of discovering anything new. What is its name? The emissary asked the most obvious question. Though in truth he likely didn't need the information. He would discover a wealth of knowledge on his own soon enough. The professor answered him anyway. It is called the portcullis key. Strange key. And how long have you been in possession of this memory? The diviner feigned mild curiosity. About 2 weeks now. Will that make a difference in what you can find out? Noble's face tensed. Perhaps. People are easy enough to divine, but inanimate objects can be trickier. The longer they have been in a person's possession, the more specific the information which I can get. Emmer took another sip of his tea. Why did he put such a strange emphasis on the word specific? Noble decided not to test the emissary by voicing her question. There is only one way to find out for sure. Emmer carefully pulled at each finger of his left glove before slipping it off of his hand. He held out his palm. Let's see what your trinket has to offer. Turning over the ball, Noble leaned across the table and dropped the portcullis key into the diviner's grasp. His fist immediately closed around it. Emmer's eyes glowed, but only for a moment. Blinking twice, the diviner's clear gaze returned. Emmer pulled his mouth to one side. Curious. What? Did it not work? Noble clasped and unclasped her hands nervously. If by it, you mean my aspect, then don't be absurd. Of course, it worked. Not work, what do you think I am? An amateur. Fortunately, Emmer did not pause long enough for Noble to respond. It worked, just not how I anticipated. That in itself is fascinating. Care to share your fascination? The professor tried to tread carefully. The man was not one who could be pushed into things. If he suspected her impatience, he might make her wait even longer before giving his revelations. Luck was on Noble's side. Emmer gave a short nod. That ball of yours, it has some very nasty energy. I could have told him that. Noble rolled her eyes internally. Anyone who had been in the presence of the portcullis key could feel the malevolent aura it put off. I have noticed as much, she answered calmly. The being who possessed the memory before your student was exceptionally powerful. He was bent on destruction. He reveled in the misery of others, and wielded this key to do something heinous. What did he do? Noble was riveted by the story. Once she found out what the key actually did, she would at least have information to give Catfine. From there, the two could decide the best course of action. I told you my aspect worked, but not as intended. Emmer seemed a bit annoyed. Noble wasn't sure if the bite in his words was aimed at himself or her. I could not see clearly. There was a haze around my vision. Like after images instead of the original ones. I saw an insanely powerful man approach his enemy with a fierce grin. He pulled out the portcullis key, and then, Noble leaned forward in rapt attention. And then the vision went dark. All I could sense was fear. I could hear people screaming in terror and agony, then nothing. I have never had that happen before. Emmer pursed his lips at the admission. It could be because you have not had the ball for very long. I could try again in a couple of months or a year. That is if you are still interested when the time comes. I appreciate the information. The professor hid her disappointment. Really, she shouldn't be. She had gained some useful information. The memory was powerful as she suspected and should not fall into the wrong hands. Does Emmer's vision mean the memory is a tool or a weapon? Or maybe both. The vision, as she suspected, only brought her more questions. I can recommend another awakened to assist you if you are impatient, Emmer suggested in the ensuing silence. Of course, that would require an official meeting to be set up so that things can be run up the chain of command properly. The professor's eyes lost their blue hue for a moment. That won't be necessary. Noble brandished a large smile. Thank you for your consideration and time. I will not keep you any longer. I must go. Noble stood. You did not touch your tea. That is most unusual, Emmer mused. You must be upset about something more than just this. Noble bent down and picked up the cup. Though it was still very hot, she drank down the liquid without complaint. I merely forgot about it in all the excitement, she explained. Thank you for your hospitality. I will leave you in peace. Forgetting for a moment that the portcullis key was a memory to be dismissed, Noble reached forward to take it back from the diviner's hand. No, he warned, but the call came too late. As the professor took hold of the ball, her fingers brushed up against the other's palm. A sudden rush of energy passed between them. The emissary's gaze lost focus. Awakened Emmer, Noble asked and waved her hand, unsure of what to do and how to proceed. Emmer stared steadily forward, his arrogant expression now completely blank. Only his measured breathing spoke of the life within him. Great, Noble, you broke the seer, she chided herself. Noble closed her eyes and focused all her energy on the other awakened. Perhaps she could emotionally jolt him into returning. All around the emissary, she sensed a whirlwind of emotions, the strongest of them being confusion, shock, and fear. But before Noble could impress her own feelings on top, the diviner suddenly blinked twice. Get back, Emmer screamed, causing Noble to snap open her eyes in shock. The diviner's face paled. With an unsteady breath, he replaced the glove on his palm. I wish you hadn't shown me that. Sorry, I did not know. Noble quickly dismissed the memory and stepped away. What did you see? You are going to need that key, awakened Noble. Emmer pinched the bridge of his nose. And I never want to see you again. At least not in the waking world. Why did you drag me into this trouble? Sorry, the professor repeated, though she had no idea what trouble he meant. I will avoid you in the waking world, I assure you. After what just happened, it was a promise that would be very easy to keep. Goodbye, awakened Emmer. Good luck, awakened Noble, Emmer responded cryptically. His face softened ever so slightly. And, if I may, my condolences on your loss. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.